Chapter 12. The alarm clicked on and music filled the bedroom. 5 a.m. Without turning on the lamp on the bedside table, Leah slid out of bed, grabbed her shorts off the floor and tugged them up her long legs. She dug through a drawer and chose a pale blue crop top with just enough elastic to conform to her breasts and exposing her midriff to just below her navel. The excitement she felt had little to do with the fact that there were only 2 more weeks of school, although the idea that she would soon be a junior in high school, therefore coming 1 year closer to graduation, was enough to make her giddy. No, her anticipation stemmed from the fact that she had every intention of introducing herself to Johnny Whitehorse. Barefoot, hairbrush in hand, she made her way down the back stairs, stopped long enough in the dim kitchen to search out a Dr. Pepper and a Snickers bar from the fridge, then exited the house. The grass felt cool and damp, the air brisk enough to bring goosebumps to her arms. That would change, however, just as soon as the sun crept up over the mountains. Lights blazed in the barns. Hands hurried about their chores, graining the eager horses, mucking the stalls, scrubbing buckets they would fill with fresh water. Though daylight was still a half-hour away, there were horses on the track already, full of energy, their lightweight riders carefully going through the ritual of walking the animals out before putting them through their runs. The animals' breath rushed from their flaring nostrils into the cold air like steam from a locomotive's smokestack. If the grooms thought Leah's appearance in the barn so early unusual, they didn't show it. They nodded respectfully, some being so bold as to smile. She moved down the concrete aisle, flanked by stalls of horses with their heads in the feed buckets. Ah, how she loved the sounds of horses eating in the morning, their contented sighs, the grinding of teeth upon fragrant oats, the occasional blow if they happened to inhale too much dust from the grain. Top that off with sweet-smelling, fresh-cut alfalfa and she felt as if she were in heaven. She found Johnny in the rehab barn. On his knees, he carefully wound an elastic bandage around the horse's cannon bone, his long dark fingers gently situating the pressure so as not to hamper the circulation. Funny how she forgot to breathe. And how the sight of him, bent over, his threadbare shirt pulled tight across his broad back, black hair spilling over his shoulders, made her feel upended and thinking she was really dumb for doing this. After all, what if he turned out to be a creep? Or to have an attitude toward whites like so many Native Americans did? "Hi," she said. Johnny looked up. His eyes narrowed, his only show of surprise to find her standing barefoot in the barn before dawn, a Dr. Pepper in one hand, a partially eaten Snickers bar in the other. "Bowed tendon?" she asked, pointing the candy at the horse's cannon bone. He looked at her feet. "Nice toes. If you want to keep them, you'd better put on some shoes." Leah wiggled her toes and smiled. "Thanks. I do have nice toes, don't I? Do you like the color on the nails? It's called flamingo fruit passion. It's supposed to smell like papaya. Want a sniff?" Sticking her foot up by Johnny's nose, she wiggled her toes again, swallowing back her need to giggle at her own outrageousness, but there was something so serious in his face and eyes that she felt obligated to relieve it, if for no other reason than to see him smile. "Well, what does it smell like?" "Fruit. What kind? Papaya? I think it smells more like peaches. My mom said strawberries." He looked at her toes, waving just below his nose. "Watermelon. Yummy. I can live with watermelon." Dropping to her knees beside him, Leah forced herself to focus on the horse's leg, and not Johnny Whitehorse's dark eyes. They were beginning to scatter her thoughts and make her realize just how silly she was acting. Normally guys were attracted to ditzy, but not this guy. He was probably thinking now that she was a major doofus. "So what's wrong with the leg?" she asked seriously. "A bow, I think." Leah bent over a bucket of foul-looking goop and sniffed. "Oh my gosh. What is that?" "Bigel oil, lard, honey, and rosin. It's my grandfather's remedy for bows. You plaster the inside of the cannon bone from knee to fetlock and bind it with warm wraps. It takes away the swelling and soreness and strengthens the tendon. Have you called a vet?" "No need to. The poultice works every time. There's talk of magnetic therapy soon. Something about positive and negative ions or something that's supposed to generate heat and better blood circulation to the traumatized area. Wiping his hands on the knees of his jeans, Johnny shook his head. Sounds like bad medicine to me. My father won't like it. He stood, grabbed up his pail of goop, and walked away. His jeans were old and thin and fraying a little along the inseams over his thighs. There was a hoof pick and a comb jutting out of the left rear pocket. His shirt had seen much better days and was just on the verge of being too small. He wore Justin boots. Not the pointed toe sort, thank goodness. Not rattlesnake hide or ostrich. Just plain brown leather that was scuffed and gouged, the sole nearly worn through and the heels in desperate need of replacing. Johnny disappeared down another barn aisle, obviously uninterested in her ploys to get to know him. That didn't surprise her, really. The Apaches were known for showing great caution toward strangers, especially whites. They did not trust easily, and friendship was something to be earned. Johnny sat on a bench in the supply room, elbows on his knees, forehead propped upon the palms of his hands as he stared at the floor between his feet. Leah leaned against the doorframe and watched him a long moment before speaking. He looked up, as he had before, face expressionless. Yet there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. I suppose I should introduce myself. Smiling, she crossed the small room that smelled like liniment and pine tar and leather new, and extended her hand. I'm Leah Foster. Ignoring her hand, he stood and, turning his back to her, began collecting an assortment of vet wraps, rice brushes, and hoof dressings. I know who you are, he said, dropping a wash mitt into a bucket, along with shampoo and a bottle of baby oil. You're the boss's daughter. And you shouldn't be out here dressed like that. The men talk among themselves and say things that are less than honorable. Hot color rushed to her cheeks as she stared at his back, her hand still extended. She could put anyone in his place, should she decide to, and had been known to get in an employee's face if she didn't like his manner or attitude or his treatment of a horse. She could cut Johnny Whitehorse off at the knees with a slice of her tongue for his rudeness and blatant honesty, but she wouldn't because he was right. She had dressed like this to catch his attention. To flirt. To tease, which was totally unlike her. She had never been an airheaded bimbo, so why was she acting like one? Johnny turned and looked down at her with a gentleness in his face that had not been there before. You're a very pretty young woman, Miss Foster. Your heart is good, and your eyes honest. If your face looked like that of a horned toad, you would still be attractive to me. Should I take that as a compliment? She grinned. A very big compliment. There are few things as ugly as the face of a horned toad. Leah laughed and shook her head. Gosh. Beneath that somber if not outright grim demeanor of Mr. Whitehorse, I suspect there is a sense of humor lurking. Don't count on it. He moved around her toward the door. Stepping in front of him, Leah offered the Dr. Pepper and candy bar. A peace offering. Want a bite? Could be dangerous. You might catch Apache fever. As Leah frowned, Johnny took the candy from her hand and bit into it, then replaced it between her fingers as she continued to stare up at him, waiting for an explanation. Your skin will gradually turn dark and you'll develop a craving for mezcal. I could think of worse things than my skin turning dark. I'm not so sure your father could. Johnny left the supply room and Leah fell in beside him. I guess you're wondering why I'm here, Leah said, virtually running to keep up with Johnny's long stride. It's your barn. You need no explanations. I wanted to see you for several reasons. First, to apologize for Larry's rudeness last week. He knows nothing about horses. I'm sure he didn't realize that honking like he did was very dangerous. Then my assessment of him was right. He's an idiot. Secondly, I was very impressed by your handling of the situation. You managed to control the horse beautifully, and you were riding bareback. My gosh, most people would have hit the ground. I'm an Indian, Miss Foster. My father is a trainer. It stands to reason that I'd know how to ride a horse bareback. Exactly. Which is why I'm here. I'd like you to give me lessons. Johnny dropped the bucket next to an empty wash stall. His hands on his hips, he finally looked down at her. I've seen you ride. You don't need any lessons from me. But I don't normally ride bareback. And when have you ever seen me ride? You ride with your mother a lot. Out there. He nodded toward the distant pastures. You're a decent rider. You have good hands and a good seat. The horse is happy with you. Besides, what with school and helping my father, I really don't have time. Sorry. He walked away, toward a rider and horse that had just entered the barn. Steam rose off the heated animal and lather dripped off its belly and ran down its legs. The jockey removed his protective glasses that were spotted with dirt and tossed them to Johnny. Fine, Leah said to herself. Be that way. She headed for the back barn, where the pleasure horses were stabled. Genesis nickered as Leah slid open the stall door and looped a lead rope around the stallion's neck. As always, he lowered his head, nuzzled it against her and waited for her to stroke him. Big baby, she murmured, sliding her hand down his silken muzzle. His eyes grew drowsy and he released a sigh of contentment that made Leah smile. You'll be a good boy for me this morning, won't you, Pooh? You'll keep your mind on me and not the babes? I've already made a big enough fool of myself this morning. We don't need to add insult to injury. After securing the big bay between cross ties, Leah curried his dark coat until it shone, brushed out his black mane and tail, then wrapped his lower legs with polos, the ones she kept for special occasions, then located her bridle in the tack room. No saddle today. She mounted by way of a step stool. The sky was just beginning to gray as Genesis pranced out of the barn, neck arched and ears erect, Leah playing with the reins just enough to remind the hot-blooded Arabian that this was not to be his usual dawn frolic around the turnout paddock. They headed for the breaking pen, a 100-foot diameter round pen not far from the stables. Leah had not lied about her bareback capabilities. She was good, but not great. As long as the stallion behaved, she could handle the situation. Her father would explode, of course. He preferred her to look the part of the senator's daughter, all refined and ladylike, a role model for young women who aspired to represent the very best of Uncle Sam, apple pie, and money. The horse easily gave to the bit as she set him into a collected canter around the arena, glancing occasionally toward the stables where she had last seen Johnny Whitehorse. The horse warmed between her legs, and its easy rocking motion fingered a slow, oozing sensation through her, one that she had come to recognize and appreciate over the last couple of years. She wasn't ignorant of what it was and meant. She and Larry weren't exactly angels, not that they had gone all the way. No way was she giving her virginity to such a moron, but they had, on occasion, enjoyed some fairly heavy petting. Johnny leaned against the wall and watched her. Leah brought the horse down to a slow, collected trot, a more difficult gait to sit with no saddle. So Johnny wasn't as disinterested in her as he'd pretended. She sank her heels hard into the stallion's side. He jumped forward, front feet leaving the ground as he pushed powerfully off his rear end. The reins slid through her loose fingers and she slipped sideways, hitting the ground and rolling face down in the sand. Eyes closed, she waited. Footsteps running. The gate thrown open. Leah smiled. Johnny sank to his knees beside her, took her gently in his hands and turned her carefully. Leah, he said softly, but urgently. Speak to me, Leah. Her eyelids fluttered and opened. His face was no longer expressionless. His eyes looked turbulent. Cradling her cheek with one hand, he eased his thumb along her lower lip and asked, "Are you all right?" Yes, she nodded. He raised one eyebrow and sat back on his heels. Then the next time you bail off a horse to try and impress me, you should try harder to land on your head. A little blood would go a long way to inspiring my pity. What are you insinuating? That I purposefully fell off that horse, exactly. Standing, Johnny turned on his heels and walked toward the horse that was nervously watching from the far side of the round pen. You're crazy, she shouted, sitting up and dusting sand from her arms and legs. Why would I bother doing such a stupid thing? Because you're rich and spoiled and accustomed to getting your way. I am not spoiled. Johnny took the reins and led the horse to her as Leah got up, slapping dirt off her rear. He extended the reins. One thing you must learn about the Apache, Miss Foster. We tolerate nothing but honesty from any man or woman. As my mother always said, say what you mean, and mean what you say. Leah rolled her eyes as Johnny started back toward the gate. Fine, she yelled. I fell off the horse on purpose. I thought you might be more receptive to giving me lessons if you thought I was a klutz. Look, I just want to get to know you. What's wrong with that? He stopped and slowly turned back. Why are you so interested in getting to know me? I'm only an Indian. You're a guy first, aren't you? No. He shook his head. I'm Indian first. And you aren't. That's reason number 1 why you shouldn't bother getting to know me. Reason number 2 is your father. He doesn't like Indians, remember? That's just stupid. She laughed. He hired your father, didn't he? If my father was from the moon and had 8 eyes and 17 arms, your father would have hired him because he's the finest trainer in this state. That doesn't mean he has to like him. Shaking her head and crossing her arms, Leah said, that's just not true. No? Johnny walked toward her. When is the last time your father asked my father into his house? Never. When has he ever asked about my father's health? Never. When has he given my father the credit he deserves for training his horses? Never. Instead, he takes these horses and gives them to Jack Jones to run because he doesn't want it known that an Indian trains his horses. And while my father drowns his disgrace in mezcal, Jack pockets thousands of dollars in bonuses and commissions that should be my father's. Taking the reins from her, Johnny tossed them over the stallion's withers. Get on your horse, Miss Foster, and I'll give you one lesson only. He turned her toward the horse and gave her a leg up. With his dark hand lying upon her thigh, he lifted his black eyes up to hers. You must become one with your animal. Your body is his body. From here, he slid his hand to the top of her leg, where her crotch nestled into the animal's flesh, then down, slowly, along her leg, to just below her knee. To here. You hold his heart between your knees. Be gentle but firm and there's nothing he won't do for you. His heart and spirit are yours, sons Ray. Sons Sons Ray. Morning star. He pointed to the solitary star that continued to shine in the dwindling gray of the bluing sky. You shine like fire in the mist, Miss Foster. Leah smiled, aware that Johnny's hand remained on her leg, like shadow upon sunlight. Even more aware that she liked it in a way that she had never liked Larry Norman's touch. Johnny's father exited the barn, his step slowing as he saw Leah and Johnny. Ishkay, he shouted angrily, striding toward the round pen, fists clenched and jaw bulging. He looks pissed, Leah whispered. What does Ishkay mean? Boy. Removing his hand from her leg, Johnny backed away, lowering his head. In my father's eyes, I haven't yet achieved an act worthy of an Apache name. Jefferson Whitehorse shouted again at Johnny, his language as foreign to Leah as Japanese. But his anger was undeniable. He did not look at Leah directly, but turned his profile to her, and with hands on his hips, waited until Johnny left the arena. They exchanged words before Johnny turned his back on his father and walked toward the barn. Only then did Jefferson Whitehorse look at her, briefly, the whites of his eyes red as fire. That night after dinner, Leah sat on the porch with her mother. The whir of insects filled the air and the first bite of chill settled around her shoulders, making her glad that she had put on jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt before curling up in the chaise. This was her favorite time to spend with her mother. Jane Foster was usually more relaxed after her evening meal and several strong drinks she called her dessert. When she was totally sober, she was far too concerned with living up to her husband's expectations. Jane held a partially full glass of Jack Daniels on the rocks as she gazed out over the sprawling front gardens. At 18, she had won the coveted title of Miss Louisiana and had gone on to become a top 5 runner-up for Miss Universe. She'd met Leah's father the following year. Their marriage had been the joining of two of the most prestigious families in the country, arranged by their fathers, of course. Even modern aristocracy made certain their bloodlines ran with nothing but the bluest blood money could buy. "I met Johnny Whitehorse today," Leah said. "Did you?" Jane replied. "He's very nice." Jane sipped her Jack Daniels. "Not bad on the eyes either. Like father, like son, I guess. He called me son's ERA. That means morning star. Pretty." She drank again. "Did Daddy ever have a nickname for you?" Her lips thinned into something less than a smile. "I'm occasionally surprised your father even knows my real name. Then again, he has his staff to remind him." The ice in the glass tinkled as she raised the drink to her lips. His winning this election should suit him nicely. He can now legitimately spend all his time in Washington rubbing elbows with men as power-hungry as he is. Leah sighed and sank back in the chair. She'd never been comfortable with her mother's cutting remarks about her husband, Leah's father, but only from the standpoint that it forced Leah to face the fact that there was no love between them. Not that she need worry that they would divorce. Foster made certain his wife was kept financially satisfied. "You could always move to Washington," Leah said. "You're joking, right?" Jane laughed. "I would suffocate within a week. Nope. This is my home. My Shangri-La. I have the freedom here to do what I want, and be whom I want. If I want to climb on a horse buck naked and ride howling under the moon, I can do just that." Grinning, Leah said, "As if you would." Turning her blue eyes on Leah, Jane raised her glass as if in toast and said, "Wanna see me? Another couple of these and I'll be ready to parasail off the fucking Sierra Blanca. What if I told you that I have a crush on Johnny Whitehorse? I'd say that I wouldn't blame you. He's a hunk. Just like his old man. They're walking, talking testosterone in blue jeans. They're enough to make a woman come just looking at them." Glancing at Leah, Jane grinned. "Oops. My little girl probably doesn't know what that means yet. Or do you?" "I'm 16, Mom. 16 going on 30. Jesus, Leah, you're too damned mature for your age. But then again, you always were. You have an old soul. A girl your age and with your looks should be out partying every night, getting laid by the football team before you marry some jerk who'll ultimately make you feel as sexually dead as an android. There are names for the girls who sleep with entire football teams. So what difference will it make when you're 42 years old? At least you'll have your memories. So you're giving me your permission to sleep with the football team?" Jane finished her drink and set the glass of ice on the floor by her chair. "Over my dead body," she finally replied. Chapter 13. Even as Johnny killed the engine to his father's truck, he knew that the minute he stepped into the house there was going to be big trouble. The music blasting through the open front door was a reminder of Johnny's mother. When his father listened to the records he and Johnny's mother had collected over the years, all the old hurt boiled to the surface. He would drink to dull the pain, but each song brought on a flurry of memories. He would grow angrier with each drink, then he would have to take it out on something, or someone. Johnny buried the truck keys deep in his pocket. Frank Sinatra crooned on the old phonograph, hiccuping each time the needle scraped across a scratch on the 45. Jefferson sprawled in a chair, one hand holding a bottle, the other a gun, a magnum he'd bought out of the trunk of someone's car a few days after Johnny's mother had run off with a white man from Kilgore, Texas. He'd had every intention of finding them and killing them both, then decided his killing himself by degrees would prove more satisfying. Johnny walked to the phonograph and turned down the volume. Jefferson looked up, narrowed his eyes, and belched. He spoke in Apache, refusing to allow anyone to speak English in his house. "Where have you been?" "The sun set hours ago. I was seeing to the horses like you told me to." "I think you lie. I think you are fucking the man's daughter." "No." Johnny moved to his father and reached for the bottle. Jefferson yanked it away and stumbled to his feet. I saw you with her today. She fell from her horse. I think you like white pussy. Like your mother likes the white man's cock. Jefferson shoved his face up to Johnny's. You are like your mother. Your eyes look at that girl with the same fire I saw in your mother's when she looked at the white man. You want to be a white man? Johnny grabbed for the bottle and missed. I don't blame my mother for leaving you. You're crazy mean and drink too much. Jefferson slammed the grip of the gun against Johnny's cheek. Pain splintered through his face as he hurled back against the wall, stumbling into a table loaded with the collection of miniature china thimbles his mother had left behind when running off with her white man. He slid down the wall, landing in tiny shards of broken glass that dug into the palms of his hands. Shoving the barrel of the gun against Johnny's head, Jefferson said, I think I will kill you so I no longer have to look into your mother's eyes. You have no bullets in that gun, Johnny said through his bleeding teeth. Are you sure? Jefferson drew back the hammer with his thumb. Perhaps I bought bullets today. Perhaps this is the day I have chosen for us to die. Johnny glanced at the gun cylinder, but there was sweat in his eyes and he could not see clearly. Jefferson pulled the trigger and the hammer cracked against the empty chamber. Johnny jumped and his heart climbed his throat, choking off his breath and making him forget, briefly, about the intense ache spreading over the right side of his head. He knocked the gun from his temple and shoved his father away. Climbing to his feet, he said, Do me a favor, old man. Next time load the gun before pulling the trigger. Unsteady, he made his way to the kitchen, spat a mouthful of blood into the sink, thought of puking, then decided against it. There really was nothing in his stomach to puke up anyway since he had not eaten since breakfast, and that had been nearly 15 hours ago. Throwing open the freezer door, he reached for an ice tray and cracked it against the countertop to dislodge the cubes just as Connie Francis began singing, Where the Boys Are. Holding a square of ice against his throbbing cheek, Johnny closed his eyes and did his best to ignore his escalating fury. He wanted to return to the living room and beat the shit out of his father for being the kind of man who would mistreat his wife so badly she would turn her back on her only son to rid herself of her misery. He wanted to drive his fist through his father's teeth for taking his anger out on the only human being left who gave a damn whether he lived or died. Tossing the remaining sliver of ice into the sink, he reached into the fridge for a 6-pack of Budweiser, slammed the door as hard as he could and left the house through the back entrance, digging the keys from his pocket and hurling the beer through the open passenger window of the truck before climbing in himself and fumbling with the starter. At last, the engine turned over. He slammed the gear in reverse and backed down the gravel drive, spitting rocks and sand into the night air. Dolores Rainwater peeled her panties down her legs and tossed them on the floor where her clothes and bra lay in a heap by Johnny's boots and jeans and shirt, and 4 empty Budweiser cans. As sounds of drunken laughter and the whoops and hollers of gambling boys reverberated against the walls, she fell back on the bed and spread her legs. Hurry up. God, a girl would die from waiting on you to finish that damn beer. How many does that make anyhow? 8. But who's counting? He crushed the can in his hand and tossed it to the floor. Your old man did a number on you tonight. You never get this bad unless you're pissed at him. Shut up. I don't want to talk about my old man. He let you have it good, I said to shut up. Grabbing up another beer, he peeled back the pop top and tossed it to the floor. The beer was warm and bitter and made him shudder. Glancing around at Dolores, her legs spread and her fingers caressing her nipples, he said, Exactly how many of those guys out there have you already been with tonight? That's a creepy thing to say. You came here with somebody. And considering you're the only girl here, you know I don't care for anybody else like I do you, Johnny. You're a whore, Dolores. And a liar. It just so happens that I enjoy the finer things in life. Sex happens to be one of them. You are on the pill, right? Yes. He drank the beer so fast his eyes watered. But his cheek didn't hurt any longer and the image of his father shoving a gun muzzle against his temple became as blurred around the edges as the vision of Dolores lying spread-eagled in front of him, massaging her breasts and pumping her hips in invitation. You look like a porno chick, he murmured, allowing the can to roll out of his hand and off the bed. Well, it doesn't seem to be getting me anywhere, she replied, exasperated. Propping up on her elbows, she stared at him. Don't tell me you're too drunk now to get it up. I'm gonna make you wish you hadn't said that. Promises, promises. You know what your problem is, Johnny? You haven't ever looked upon sex as like, recreational. You think it's supposed to mean something. Until you decide just to let yourself go and have fun with it, you're never going to reap the benefits. He climbed over her, rocking back and forth on his hands and knees. The bed felt as if it were rolling like a canoe on waves. Grinning, Dolores slid her hand down his belly and wrapped her fingers around him. You know I love you, Johnny. We're a team. We're gonna make it out of this hellhole, you just wait. You won't have to let your father beat you up anymore, and I won't have to live in that hovel on the reservation. Tell me you love me, Johnny. Just once. He kissed her as he slid inside her, sank deep, drawn deep as she lifted her legs around his waist and clutched him close. I don't love you, he whispered as she squirmed against him, making little whimpering noises in her throat. She didn't seem to hear him. Or maybe she simply did not care. He was not the only boy who used her body. There were plenty, and probably most of them were more than willing to tell her what she wanted to hear, even if it was a lie. But he had never used those 3 words to anyone. Not to his mother or father. Not Dolores or the few girls he had made it with since turning 14. There had never been a person worthy of them, until he happened one day to see Leah Foster riding her stallion along a creek bed that skirted her father's property. He had known for certain the day she smiled up at him from Norman's convertible. As the traffic light turned green, Johnny eased his foot off the clutch, gave the truck a little gas, then felt it shiver, sputter, tremble like an animal in death throes before dying. He pumped the clutch and turned the ignition. Nothing. The car behind him blasted its horn. Johnny glanced up into the rearview mirror, frowning as the car's bright lights reflected back into his eyes. He tried the ignition a second time, then slammed his fist against the steering wheel and shoved open the door. He was too damn drunk for this. He should have gone home immediately after leaving Dolores, but the idea of facing his father when he had had this much to drink was not a good idea. He had never lifted a hand against his father, and he wanted to keep it that way. With horns blaring behind him, Johnny at last managed to lift the hood of the old Dodge. The traffic light cast an orange glow over the engine parts before turning red. Hey buddy, you gonna move this heap tonight or what? Johnny looked up. A middle-aged man with a beer belly straining at his shirt buttons stared at him, hands on his hips, a Stetson shoved back on his head. He wore a gaudy Rolex watch encrusted with gold nuggets and diamonds, and his belt buckle, or what Johnny could see of it below the man's belly, was a gold and silver replica of Texas. Johnny had seen 1,000 of him, a Texas oil man with a stable full of quarter horses. They moved into Ruidoso like locusts every year to run their animals on the track, acting as if they owned the place. Well, the man shouted. You habla Ingalls? Johnny gave him a flat grin. You habla Apache? You movin' this piece of crap or what, smart ass? No. Johnny slammed the hood, leaned against the truck and crossed his arms. I think I'm going to let you move it since you want it moved so bad. The light turned green and the cacophony began again from the dozen cars backed up down the highway. Look, punk, I gotta be at the track in 5 minutes. Now I'm telling you, get this junk pile out of the highway before I get really pissed. Shrugging, Johnny got in the truck, shifted the gear into neutral, and got out again. The Texan continued to glare at him as Johnny walked toward his car, a sparkling new top-of-the-line Cadillac, black with gold trim, with dealer tags still stuck in the back window. A young woman with bleached hair and fake eyelashes, wearing a rhinestone halter top that exposed most of her tanned breasts, and a leather miniskirt that hardly covered her crotch, stared at Johnny as he dropped into the seat beside her and flashed her a smile. Holy crap, she said, looking him up and down, her painted mouth curling and her tweezed eyebrows rising. You an Indian, honey? In the flesh. He slammed the door and locked it. The Texan slowly moved toward his car, his jaw sagging and his beady eyes becoming round as pennies. "You gonna kidnap me or something?" the woman asked, starting to breathe hard. "You want me to?" He shifted the transmission into drive. "Ever made it with an Indian, lady?" "Aw. But looking at you, I'm beginning to wonder what I've been missing." "That fat old man your father?" "Hardly." "Your husband?" She shook her head, smiling. "You a hooker?" "Not unless you want me to be." She winked. Johnny looked out at the Texan, who continued to stand in the middle of the street, jaw sagging, expression dazed. Johnny flipped him the finger, then eased the car against the rear fender of the truck and pushed it out into the intersection, bringing traffic to a screeching halt. "Hang on, lady," Johnny said, then stomped the accelerator as hard as he could. Rubber screamed and smoke flew as Johnny steered around the truck and wove through the traffic. He headed down the highway at 70 miles an hour while the woman beside him squealed and bounced in her seat. God almighty, the girls back in Dallas ain't even gonna believe this. "I've been kidnapped by a damned Apache." She reached under the seat and dug out a pint of Jack Daniels. "Time to party, baby. This is the most fun I've had since I got to Ruidoso with that old fart." Tossing the cap out the window, she turned the liquor up to her lips and drank deeply, shuddered, then handed him the bottle. He shook his head. "I'm drunk enough already. Come on. Just a drink. It's not every day you steal a car and kidnap a white woman, is it?" "Whiskey makes me crazy." She drank again, laughed, and hung her head out the car window, allowing the wind to whip back her blonde hair. He pulled off the highway onto a gravel-topped road and headed toward White Sands. The earlier drunken buzz in his head was settling into a throb behind his eyes, and the huge anger that had driven him to get into the situation he was in began to diminish. "Come on, Injun Joe. Have a drink. Just one. I hate to drink alone." She waved the bottle at him. Grabbing it from her, he tipped it up to his mouth and drank while keeping his eyes on the dark road ahead. The liquor hit his stomach and ricocheted like a bullet straight to his head. He squeezed his eyes closed briefly. The car swerved, skirted the road shoulder, then wove back over the center yellow stripe. He took his foot off the gas. To his right was a dirt road. Braking, he eased the car off the highway, onto the side road, and stopped. The woman reached over and shifted the car into park, then killed the engine. Removing the pint bottle from his hand, she lifted it to his lips and tipped it up. The whiskey ran smooth as hot honey down the back of his throat. "How old are you, sweetie?" came the woman's voice, soft and husky near his ear. 17, he heard himself say. "Ooh. Just hitting your prime, huh? All those raging hormones. My name is Janice, by the way." She kissed his ear. "Love the hair. It's so savage." Her fingers slid over his chest, threaded through the openings between the buttons on his shirt, massaged his nipples, then eased down his belly to his crotch. "So, you wanna? Do it?" He looked at her, trying to focus on her face. Her hair stood out wildly from her head. Her lipstick had smeared and one breast had almost come out of her halter, exposing most of her nipple. Now that she was up close, he could see that she wasn't young at all. There were wrinkles under her heavy makeup and her breath smelled like stale cigarettes. "Ever made it with a white woman?" She grinned and rubbed her breasts against him. "Young strong buck like you, bet the girls just can't say no, huh?" Her fingers unsnapped the button on his jeans, then the zipper. Johnny caught his breath as her cool fingers slid through the Y front on his jockey underwear. "Ever had a woman go down on you, sweetie?" He swallowed and shook his head. Her mouth smiled and her lips parted. "Imagine that." Easing the bottle into his hand, Janice lowered her head toward his lap. "Hey," he slurred. "Lady. What the hell? Oh man. I'm too drunk for this." He groaned and stared down at her with fascination, what she was doing to him with her lips and tongue and teeth. His eyes rolling, his head falling against the back of the seat, he said, "I'm gonna get in real trouble for this." She reached across his lap and hit a button on the door. Johnny's seat eased back. He grabbed the steering wheel, hit the horn accidentally. Where the hell was he supposed to put his hands? God, oh God, what was she doing? He took another hit of Jack Daniels, groaned and gritted his teeth as it seemed she would draw the very life of him out through his organ. Geez, he was going to come. Lady, you'd better. Too late. Not that it mattered to her, obviously. He heard himself cry out once, then again. Finally, the woman lifted her head and licked her lips. Not bad, huh? There's more where that came from if you're interested. The red and blue lights from a squad car on the road behind them suddenly swirled in the rearview mirror. Johnny dropped the whiskey and zipped up his pants. As Janice sat up and looked out the back window, he grabbed for the door handle. Hey, Janice cried. Where the hell do you think you're going? Don't be stupid, kid. You can't outrun them. He jumped from the car just as the police skidded to a stop behind the Cadillac, siren whooping and lights whirling. He took off across the rocky terrain, jumping rocks and cactus and low-growing prickly shrubs. Stop, Johnny, an officer shouted. Rocks and sand tumbled as he clawed his way up the side of a steep hill, slipping, stumbling. Normally he would not have had any problem outdistancing the pair of pudgy cops chasing him. He'd done it a dozen times before, but then he hadn't been loaded with Budweiser and Jack Daniels, which was making the ground tip from side to side like an out-of-control seesaw. A cop hit him from behind. Hard. Drove him to his knees and then his belly, slamming his face into the rocks and dirt. Damn you, Johnny, get down and stay down. Hey Chuck, I got him. Johnny drove his elbow into the cop's rib and did his best to pitch him off, causing the cop to curse and slam his knee into Johnny's back. Then a second pair of hands buried in his hair and snapped back his head. You're just one breath away from assaulting an officer, kid. If I was you, I'd lay real still and think about what I was doing. God, came Janice's voice. You gotta be so rough with him? He's just a kid, for gosh sakes. Evading arrest, ma'am. You want to get back in the car? Johnny's arms were wrenched around his back and cuffs were slapped on his wrists. You've done it now, Johnny. Jesus, what were you thinking to steal a car and kidnap a woman? You gonna behave now? You gonna get up and walk back to the squad car without me having to call in another unit? 'Cause if I got to call in another unit, somebody is going to want to get nasty and I wouldn't like to see that with you. Johnny? You listening to me? He nodded. The cop dragged Johnny to his knees, then helped him to his feet. His partner, Officer Chuck Parker, shined his flashlight into Johnny's face and shook his head. You and your old man been at it again, Johnny? He do that to your face? If he did, you can press charges against him. You don't have to take that kind of bullshit from him. When you gonna stop protecting the son of a bitch? Save your breath, Chuck, Officer Delaporte said, shoving Johnny toward the squad car. They're all alike. They're not gonna tell you jack shit. Janice stood by the Cadillac, hugging herself against the cold as Johnny walked by. Officer Parker opened the rear door of the squad car, and Johnny dropped in. The door slammed and automatically locked. Through the grilled windows he watched the cops walk back to the Cadillac. One spoke to Janice while the other dug through the car, exiting with a bottle of Jack Daniels. Closing his eyes, he laid his head back against the seat. His face throbbed. His stomach churned, not simply from the booze and beer he'd imbibed, but from the far too familiar smell of the car. It stank of sweat and vomit and the barbecue the officers had eaten for dinner. The car doors opened and the officers climbed in. Officer Parker looked back and stared at Johnny from beneath the brim of his hat. You okay? He asked. Johnny nodded. Not gonna puke all over our car, are you? He shook his head. You know what kind of time you can get for car theft and kidnapping, Johnny. I'm a juvenile. I won't get 48 hours and you know it. I want you to think real hard about pressing charges of abuse on your old man Johnny. You can't let him keep beating you up like this every time he has too much to drink and gets pissed off. Go to hell, he mumbled. By the time the cell door slid open and Officer Parker shouted Johnny's name, Johnny had slept off most of his drunk. Opening his eyes, he squinted toward the bright light overhead and tried to remember where he was. "Whitehorse, you're up and out of here." Raising his head, he focused on Parker's face. "You're free to go," the officer said. Johnny sat up slowly. His head felt like hell and his mouth tasted little better. "Get the lead out, kid. My shift is over and I want to go home." "What about the charges?" He ran one hand over his eyes and down his face, lightly touching the swelling on his cheek. "Folks are not pressing charges. Lady says she invited you to take her for a ride." Standing unsteadily, Johnny then moved toward the door. "You call my old man?" he asked. "Yep." He didn't answer. "My grandfather?" No luck. Parker slid the door shut and followed Johnny down the corridor, toward the office with large plate glass windows, where an officer in charge of juveniles sat on the edge of his desk, talking with a woman with her back to Johnny. He slowed as the woman turned in her chair, her blue eyes connecting with his. "What the hell is she doing here?" he asked. "She's who I call to bail out your father." In jeans and a purple sweatshirt, Leah's mother stood and tucked her clutch purse under her arm. Parker stepped around Johnny and opened the door, allowing Johnny to enter the office before him. Jane Foster smiled unsteadily. "You don't look so good, Johnny." "I'm not feeling so good." He shoved his hands into his back pockets and stared at the floor. Hashing a look at Officer Parker, she said, "What about the charges?" "No charges this time. He's lucky. Grand theft auto isn't exactly a misdemeanor." Obviously, he made quite an impression on the lady. "Like father like son," Jane said. "Can we go now, officer? I suggest you find him a place to sober up before taking him home. He could probably use some food by the looks of him, not to mention a bath." Jane pointed toward the door and Johnny turned, moved out of the office and through the station lobby, to the door marked exit, out into the parking lot of black and white squad cars. "Get in," she said, pointing to a baby blue Lincoln by the curb. Sinking into the beige leather seat, he watched Jane Foster round the car, her long dark hair not unlike her daughter's. Sheesh. Her daughter. The last person in the world he wanted to know about this stupidity was Leah Foster. Jane slid in beside him. The musky scent of her cologne in the confined space made his stomach queasy. The engine purred and the heater automatically kicked on as Jane backed the town car out of the parking space and headed down Main Street. Flipping open her purse, she dug out a pack of cigarettes, then punched in the car lighter. "You smoke, Johnny?" He shook his head no. "Good. It's bad for you. I've tried to quit 100 times at least, but I've had to face the fact that I like the crap. Guess it's a little like your drinking. You know you shouldn't do it. It's going to make you sick, but you do it anyway." The lighter clicked and she reached for it, pressing its glowing end to the tip of the cigarette in her mouth. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes. Johnny pressed the window down button, allowing fresh air into the car. "You don't say much, do you, Johnny?" He looked out the passenger window at the dark countryside and wondered what time it was. "It's that Apache mystique, huh? What's that belief? By talking too much, or telling too much, you give away your soul." "Right." She laughed, then coughed, then inhaled again. They continued to ride in silence for a while, then Jane said, "Must have been a bad one tonight." "What did he hit you with?" "Doesn't matter. What set him off?" "What else?" "Jack Daniels. It makes him crazy." "Makes you a little crazy too, huh?" "Life makes me crazy. It makes us all crazy, Johnny. We could all be out there boozing and fighting and raising hell, but some of us find less violent and self-destructive means to work out our problems." Turning his eyes on her, he said, "That why you're screwing my old man?" She hit the brakes hard, causing the Lincoln to fishtail before sliding to a stop in the middle of the black, deserted highway. Reaching across his lap, she yanked on the door handle and shoved open the door. "Get out. Get out of my car, you ungrateful young shit." Johnny stepped out onto the asphalt, then looked back. The overhead light made Jane look sallow, the skin around her eyes dark as soot. "You're a nice lady," he said. "And nice looking. I just think you can do better than him." Tires squealing, the Lincoln shot away, leaving Johnny standing in the road, head pounding and stomach churning, watching the red taillights grow small in the distance. Then the brake lights flashed and the car backed toward him, weaving from side to side before sliding to a stop beside him. "Get in," she said. He opened the door and got in. Again they rode in silence. As they sped past the driveway entrance to his house, he looked at her. "I can hardly take you back there considering your condition. The last thing you need is to get into another brawl tonight. Besides, that cut on your cheek needs seeing to. If you're worried about Leah, you needn't be. She already knows about their hauling you in." She was still up when Officer Parker called. "Great." He slouched into the seat. The house glowed from every window. Leah stood in the open front doorway, fingers tucked into her jeans pockets as she watched the car pull up to the porch and stop. Jane got out. Johnny took his time, watching Jane bound up the steps and speak to Leah before disappearing into the house. He closed the car door and leaned against it. Leah moved down the steps, shoulders slightly hunched as she stopped at the edge of the light, bare toes with their polished nails slightly hanging over the lip of the stair. Flamingo fruit passion, he thought. Had it only been that morning when she'd shown up at the barn looking like a bouquet of fresh-cut flowers? And smelling just as sweet? Making him hate his life more than he ever thought possible? "I made sandwiches," she said softly. "Sometimes it helps to put something in your stomach. How would you know? My mom has a little too much sometimes. I fix her peanut butter on crackers. But you don't look like the peanut butter and crackers sort, so I made ham and cheese." She rubbed her arms and curled her toes under. "It's really chilly. Let's go in, okay?" She turned and bounded up the steps, her hair dancing around her shoulders. Taking a resigned breath, Johnny followed as far as the door, then paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the bright lights flooding down from the massive chandelier over the foyer. There were fresh-cut flowers on every table, and portraits on the walls. "Are you coming?" Leah shouted from a hallway leading off the foyer. He walked carefully over the black and white marble-tiled floor, his gaze fixed on Leah where she stood in the shadows, her smile encouraging him onward. Then she slipped through another illuminated doorway that turned out to be the kitchen, nearly as big as his father's entire house. There were pots and pans hanging on hooks from the ceiling. Glistening countertops and sparkling glass cupboard doors. A stone fireplace on one wall, bookcases on another, loaded with cookbooks that looked as though they had never been opened. Leah opened the refrigerator and reached for 2 sodas, along with an apple and orange and a bowl of grapes. "Sit." She pointed with her foot toward a 3-legged stool next to a counter bar. Johnny glanced around. "Where's your father?" "Washington." "Where else?" Grinning, she laid out the food next to his plate. "You can relax. He isn't going to come roaring through the door like the cavalry or something. I don't think he'd like me here. Like I said, he isn't here. When he isn't here, I do what I want and see who I want. And when he is?" He picked up a grape and rolled it in his fingers. "Are you Daddy's good little girl when he's home? See who Daddy wants you to see. Go where Daddy wants you to go." Leah slid onto a stool and reached for her soda. "I pretty much do what I want to do. How's your face? When we're done here, I'll clean it for you," he shrugged. "I've had worse." "Do you like your father?" Leah asked. Tossing down the grape, he reached for the sandwich, not sure he wanted it, thinking he probably should eat it, feeling very strange standing in such a grandiose kitchen and talking so nonchalantly with the girl he'd had a crush on for months, who, until this morning, had not even acknowledged his existence. "I like him sometimes. When he's sober. Then you acknowledge that he's stupid when he drinks." Johnny removed the lettuce from the sandwich and set it aside. "Your point?" He flashed her a look, suspecting already what her point was going to be. "Just that you see what drinking does to your father. What he becomes. Why do you want to be that way?" "I don't." Johnny, stealing a car and a woman isn't exactly smart. And I don't think you would have done it if you hadn't been drinking. You're very lucky that the lady took pity on you. Is that what she took on me? He shook his head, remembering Janice's head in his lap. Let's just say we hit it off and leave it at that. Leah frowned and stared at him hard. There was a tiny crumb of bread on her lip, and he wondered with an odd sort of spitefulness what she would do if he leaned over and licked it off. Well, she cleared her throat. Have you given any thought to what you're going to do with your life? What are you? A social worker? No. Just someone who sees a tragedy in the making when I look at you. To say you're good-looking is an understatement. But I think you know that already. I asked Mr. Dilbert, the principal at school, about you last week. He told me you're a straight B student but your attitude sucks. You fight too much. You're consistently late for class and you enjoy getting in the teacher's face. He said you drove Mr. Dubbock so far over the edge last year that the two of you wound up in a fistfight. He called me a stinking Indian. I know Mr. Dubbock. He's a good guy. For him to get nasty, he must have been pushed to the edge. Why do you get so angry at being called an Indian? It's what you are. It's the stinking that pissed me off. I happen to be proud that I'm Apache. Great. Then if Apache is something to be proud of, why don't you act it? Represent your heritage in a shining example. Educate us. Teach us what it means to be a Native American. I think I've done a good job of that tonight, he said angrily, throwing down the sandwich. You want to know what being Native American is, Pinda Likoi? It is living in poverty. It is existing like animals in a zoo, where people stick their cameras in our face and take pictures of us like we're oddities. It is dealing with a government that goes back on its promises to us. We listen to the horror of Hitler and the Holocaust, of a government that wiped out millions of innocent men, women, and children, and the world weeps for them, Leah. But who weeps for us? Who remembers that the white man swept over our country and slaughtered us, left our children's corpses to feed the coyotes, and those who remained were gathered like cattle onto parcels of shitty land and left there to die of starvation and white man's diseases, and the loss of our dignity? Leah reached over and laid her hand on Johnny's, and she smiled. Then you should know by now that it will do you no good whatsoever to fight with your fists. Anger only begets anger. Use your brain, Johnny. Show us all what it could mean to be Johnny Whitehorse. Her hand squeezed his, then drew away, yet her gaze remained on his, the blueness of it a tranquility that made him feel weightless. So, she said, her lips still smiling, ever played football? You look like you would make a great tight end. Chapter 14. Leah opened her eyes. The inside of Roy's truck felt like an oven. She couldn't breathe. I must have dozed. She cleared her throat and sat up, looking beyond Roy to the porch where Johnny's grandfather had been sitting. He was gone. The old man has agreed to let you see Johnny, Roy said. But you must swear to tell no one of his location. He only does this because he knows what you mean to Johnny. Roy opened the door and stepped back. It's a long journey. You'd better start now if you want to get there by dark. She followed Roy toward the corral at the back of the old man's property. Ben Whitehorse, whose face looked as aged as the dilapidated barn, stood by a sway-backed paint horse with one brown eye and one blue. Ben had bridled the horse, if one could call the rope braid wrapped over the horse's muzzle and looped around its withers a bridle. There was no saddle. Roy helped Leah to mount, then smiled up at her. Let the horse take you. He knows the way. He pointed to the low mountain that seemed to Leah in that moment as tall as the Sierra Blanca. The mountain spirit rides with you. Yellen. Stepping back, Roy slapped the horse on the rump and the animal moved down the path toward the trees. Leah looked back as Ben Whitehorse lifted his arms toward the sky and began chanting softly in Apache. Roy raised his hand briefly, then turned and walked toward his truck. The path climbed sharply up the hillside, forcing Leah to lean slightly over the horse's withers and grasp its mane with both hands to steady herself. Occasionally, fir and piñón and cedar trees formed a low canopy overhead, so she had to lie low or risk getting scraped from the animal's back. The rocky thread of ground curved like a snake's back through crevices of boulders that rose up to form cathedral-like pitches over her head. More and more the path inclined until the horse was forced to scramble for footing, lunging itself upward while Leah closed her eyes and gripped her legs tightly as possible, remembering what Johnny had told her once about riding bareback. Hold his heart between your knees. Become one with the animal and he with you. Trust him and he will take care of you. The earth to her right disappeared, dropping sharply out of sight, so it seemed to her that the horse balanced on thin air. Crows and eagles soared level with her, and the trees below blurred into a green, indistinct cloud, interrupted only by the diminutive gray lines of highways and the clusters of buildings that represented Mescalero and Ruidoso. But even that disappeared as they wound around the far side of the mountain. The horse's flesh turned hot and sweaty, soaking her jeans so they rubbed the insides of her thighs raw. The sun burned down on her, and the reflection of it off the rocks made her eyes sting. The horse stumbled, going down on both front knees. She clutched its neck and looked over the lip of the ledge as stones bounced like rubber balls down the side. They climbed for another hour. Then another. Until the sun disappeared over the western mountains and shadows of rocks painted strange shapes on the trail. Her legs cramped, as did her shoulders. Having clutched the reins and mane so fiercely for so long, her hands ached with a numbness that shot hot pain up her arms. A moment passed before she realized they had stopped climbing. Its head down, the horse made a grunting sound and blew through its nostrils. The mountaintop formed a mesa of sand and rocks and scrubby wind-twisted trees. Before her burned a campfire, and just beyond that stood a small inipi covered with heavy colorful blankets to allow no light and air inside the brush structure. Leah slid off the horse, wincing as her feet hit the ground. Carefully as possible, she straightened, massaged the small of her back, and took a couple of unsteady steps before being certain her legs would hold her. The wind whipped over the mesa edge, scattering brown grass and kicking dirt around her ankles as she moved toward the primitive structure. "Johnny?" she called softly, glancing toward the campfire, where glowing coals were mounded around rocks the size of tennis balls. The opening of the inipi had been covered with a blanket. Going down on her knees, Leah drew the flap aside and did her best to peer into the dark room. Steam rushed over her face, robbing her of breath. "Johnny?" she whispered, crawling through the opening and into the dark, wet heat. Naked, his skin beaded with water and sweat, Johnny sat near the glowing, steaming stones in the center of the sweat lodge, his back to her, his head fallen forward so his hair partially covered his face. He did not acknowledge Leah's presence. His eyes closed, he rocked back and forth, silently chanting. Leah moved around the confined space until she was sitting across from him. The steam rose up from the stones so thickly that she felt suffocated. Her eyes stung and her clothes clung to her skin as she did her best to see Johnny's face in the fog. "Johnny?" He continued to sway. His lips moved. "Johnny?" Leah touched his scraped and bruised cheek and his swaying stopped. Slowly, his head came up and his eyes opened. He stared at her, emotionless, as if his soul were someplace else. A niggling of uneasiness centered in her chest, causing her voice to tremble. "Are you okay?" "God, Johnny, I've been worried out of my mind." He said nothing. Did nothing. Not so much as a blink of his dark eyes to acknowledge her. Leah moved closer, around the pit of stones, sank into the sand beside him so his wet, gritty skin pressed against her own. She took his face between her hands and forced him to look at her. "Have you taken something?" she asked. "Johnny, are you on drugs? Please, answer me." "Dolores is dead," he whispered. "I know. I'm sorry. But hiding away here won't change the fact that she's gone." At last some life came to his eyes and he focused hard on her face as sweat beaded on the tips of his lashes, then ran down his cheeks. His jaw became rock solid. His expression became fierce and savage as he wrapped his hand around her nape and roughly pulled her closer. Johnny Whitehorse runs from nothing, sons Ray. I'm more than ready to face the consequences of Dolores's death, and to tell all that I know. I came here because of you. To sweat you from my soul and my heart. To sweat away the pain that I feel every time I think of you. To sweat away the love that has eaten away at my heart since the first moment I saw you those years ago riding your father's stallion, the wind in your hair and the sun dancing on your face. Foolish, isn't it, to think I could suddenly stop loving and needing you now when I couldn't do it the last 12 years. Twisting his fingers in her hair, he drew her face up to his. Now here you are, breathing life again into my spirit, and a hunger as hot as the desert wind. I want you. I don't want you. I need you. I don't need you. You are more complication than I need in my life. You're a ghost that haunts me, and if I could I would exorcise you back to your sky world and make you take your memory with you. I never stopped loving you, she said, and began unbuttoning her blouse. There hasn't been a day that I haven't regretted what I did. The decision I made. I felt your pain every night that I lay in my bed and thought of you, and the life we might have had together. But I had no choice, Johnny. When my father learned of our relationship, he vowed to destroy your father if I continued to see you. I broke up with you to protect you, you murdered me, Leah. He cupped his hand over her breast, slitting his fingertips along the edge of her bra before flipping the strap off her shoulder. The masculine, musky scent of his sweating body roused a hunger in her that, over the last many years, had inspired vast fantasies, yet none had felt as overwhelming as this moment. How many nights had she nestled in her husband's arms thinking of Johnny Whitehorse, and what she would do if ever she lay with him again. For a very long time I wanted to destroy you, but in hating you so I destroyed myself. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice sounding rough and low as she allowed the blouse to slide down her arms. The steam slid over her skin like hot velvet as she watched Johnny unhook the bra closure between her breasts and peel away the filmy material. Her head falling back and her eyes drifting closed, Leah caught her breath as Johnny lowered his head and took a taut, throbbing nipple between his teeth, gently at first, then almost painfully, sucking it hard, cruelly, causing her to gasp and whimper in her throat, at the same time acknowledging the sensation of heat igniting between her legs and mounting as he lay her back on the ground and stretched his big body out on hers. He pressed kisses against her heated flesh, swirled his tongue upon the ridge of her ribs, grazed her skin with his teeth and breathed hotly against it until she writhed in both pleasure and pain and made soft keening sounds in her throat, until she lifted her hips and invited him to unsnap her jeans. For a moment they clung insistently to her, until he tore them down her legs and tossed them aside. Wearing only the briefest panties, she lay sprawled before him, sweat and steam turning her pale skin as red as the embers heating the stones outside. On his knees between her legs, his black hair falling over his shoulders, he allowed her to look at his body, to acknowledge his massive erection that she had once been much too shy to openly admire. Johnny Whitehorse was no longer a boy. The memory of his younger body did not do him justice. That body had not been honed of long bone and defined muscle that came from hours of working out, and though she once had felt the cravings of adolescent desire while in his arms, the hunger that streaked through her in that moment was beyond anything she had ever experienced. "What are you waiting for?" she asked. His black eyes narrowed and his lips curved sensually. He ran one hand down the length of his erection and she watched with caught breath as it swelled even more, causing Johnny's face to tense, his teeth to clench, and a low groan to rattle in his throat. 12 years, he murmured, sliding the tips of his fingers up her thigh, to the elastic edge of her panties, dipping beneath to search out the sensitive place between her legs that had turned as hot and liquid as the steam pressing down on her. For 12 years I thought of other men holding you, of touching you, of teaching you things I wanted to teach you. Of smelling you. And tasting you, and making your body desperate to be fucked. I've been with a lot of women, Leah. Some of them nice. Most of them not so nice. I'm not the same boy who got drunk on sangria and took your virginity with clumsy recklessness. But then, you're no longer a virgin. Twisting his fingers in the crotch of her panties, he ripped them in two and shoved the silk remnant up around her waist, exposing the fading scar of her cesarean surgery across her abdomen. He traced it with one finger before bending and kissing it, following the slightly puckered skin with the tip of his tongue. Closing her eyes, feeling the slight tickle of his tongue and the ends of his hair over her sensitive skin, she reached to bury her hands in his hair. He caught her wrists in his hard fingers, and as he rose up once again to cover her body with his, he stretched her arms out to her side and pinned them to the ground. "Don't touch me," he told her, sliding his knees between her thighs and shoving them apart. "I'm going to give you exactly what you deserve, Leah. What I've wanted to do since the night I showed up at your door with my heart in my hand and my idiotic dreams of happily ever after branded in my brain. Remember what you said to me that night, Leah?" "I don't love you," she said, turning her face away as he slid his body into hers, stretching it painfully, causing her to gasp at the shocking pressure that lifted her hips briefly from the ground and wrung a short startled cry from her. "Oh God, Johnny. I didn't mean it." "What else, Leah?" He looked down her body, to the place where his own disappeared into hers. "Do you recall what else you said that night?" He moved deeper, opened her legs further to better accommodate him while his fingers tightened on her wrists and ground them harder into the dirt. "That I had never loved you. It was all a mistake. Foolishness. I must have been crazy to even think I could have been attracted to you. And? You didn't and never would fit into my life, not being what you are." She shook her head as her chest tightened and the tears began to stream. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Please believe that I didn't mean it. I only said those things because my father was there. I couldn't allow him to hurt you." "Hurt me?" he grinned. "The son of a bitch has destroyed everything I have ever loved. I won't allow it to continue, Leah. I can't. Damn you for coming here. For reminding me that no matter how I try I can't get you out of my system." His hips pumped hard, grinding her buttocks into the dirt, yet she refused to take her eyes from his, just gave her body in supplication like one happily sacrificing her soul. She awoke, shivering, despite the shirt Johnny had laid across her, her knees drawn up to her chest and her head resting on her rolled-up jeans. Where was she? And why in God's name did she feel as if she'd been stampeded over by a herd of horses? The stones in the center of the inipi had grown cold and the brisk air bit at her skin as Leah sat up, her eyes heavy, body aching and shivering as she carefully slid her arms into Johnny's shirt sleeves and wrapped the garment around her. The darkness inside the inipi felt suffocating, and the throbbing between her legs made even breathing an effort. Then she remembered. There had been nothing remotely resembling love in what Johnny had done to her. He had treated her like a whore, worse, she suspected, than he treated the women who, over the last several years, had so eagerly spread their legs for no other reason than to be screwed by the famous, and infamous, Johnny Whitehorse. He had fucked her with all the pent-up hurt and anger that had eaten at him over the years. All the fear and sorrow that must have incapacitated him in the days since Dolores's death. Did he blame her for that as well? Was that why he had come here, as he said, to sweat her out of his system? To be done with her emotionally once and for all? Leah laughed to herself. What irony that at long last she had acknowledged her feelings to him and now he wanted no part of her. As she reached for her jeans, the sound of chanting came to her. Tossing back the flap over the opening, Leah looked out through the pre-dawn gray haze, to the yellow light cast up by the campfire flames. Dressed only in his jeans and a mantle of brown and gray eagle feathers that had been attached to his arms, all the way to his wrists, Johnny moved in carefully choreographed steps around the halo of flickering light, his head fallen forward and his hands stretched toward the sky. He had painted white dots on his cheeks and zigzag lines resembling lightning bolts down the backs of his hands, and segments of his long hair had been plaited and decorated with colorful beads. He took her breath away. This was the part of Johnny Whitehorse that she had never experienced. Frightening. Mystical. Savage. Yes, savage. Wild. Free. dangerous, and arousing despite what he had done to her in the last few hours. He danced. And danced. Spun. Dipped. Leapt. His voice rose and fell, odd choppy words that made no sense to Leah. Grunts, cries, shouts. His arms outstretched like eagle wings as his bare feet kicked up dust, making him appear as if he were soaring through clouds. And as he chanted and danced, it seemed to Leah that the beat of drums and the bird-like warbling of flutes rang out a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat from the dark sky, along with the sing-song rise and fall of ghostly voices that chanted along with him. Ghosts. Spirits, Gans, as the Apache called them. Leah believed in neither. It was only the play of firelight and dust and the first streaks of daylight creeping in scarlet waves over the eastern mountain peaks that formed the shapes of dancing men in fierce headdresses and buckskin masks, their dark eyes peering out at her through the slits in the colorful hides as they moved in unison around the firelight. No doubt if she looked back into the black inipi she would see herself asleep still, her head lying on her jeans, her body curled up under Johnny's shirt and shivering with cold, and she would realize that she was dreaming. Just dreaming. Johnny chanted to the awakening sky, his arms outstretched, the eagle feathers fluttering in the clash of cold and warm air as the sun rose higher. Blood red and burning it filled up the sky, dwarfing the earth, turning the mountains into hills and the sky into a scarlet mirror. He became a black silhouette against the fiery shield, a speck of dust upon the universe, yet his voice rose as clear as bells on a soundless Sunday morning. Then it was over. As the last of the sun's red flood drained into yellow, Johnny stopped dancing and his voice fell silent. Wearily, facing the sun, his head fallen back, he dropped his arms to his sides and slowly fell to his knees. Leah dragged her jeans on, then, tossing Johnny's shirt aside, slid her blouse on and clumsily buttoned it. She felt around for her shoes, then crawled from the inipi into the sunlight that was fast becoming brilliant enough to blind her. She was forced to squint in order to determine that Johnny was no longer there. "It's time to go," came his voice. She looked around. Astride the painted horse, he looked down at her, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. Beneath the white paint on his cheeks, his skin looked ashen. Johnny held his hand out to her. She moved stiffly to the horse and took his hand. He swung her up behind him, and as he turned the animal down the trail, Leah wrapped her arms around him and laid her head against his back, the vision of his dancing before the burning red sun still vivid in her mind. Chapter 15. The funeral service for Dolores was held at the reservation's Catholic church, erected a century before by Father Albert Ron, who had hoped to flush heathenism from the Apache spirit. However, the only Apache to grace the small congregation on that day was Dolores herself, closed inside her rosewood coffin that Johnny's agent had picked out at Dickinson's funeral home the day before. The scattering of attendees were from the television station where she worked. Johnny suspected they were there out of duty more than real grief and respect for a colleague. Dolores had stepped on a lot of toes while establishing her name and reputation as a top-notch reporter. He suspected there were more than a few of her peers who would leave the service and celebrate with Dom Perignon. "So where the hell is her family?" Edwin whispered as Johnny moved up the church aisle, toward the open doors where the sounds of excited reporters and fans sounded like revelers awaiting the passing of floats during Mardi Gras. Johnny put on his dark glasses and glanced around the church. "The Apache believe in burying their dead at night. They'll come for her later. Maybe we should leave through the back entrance. And make me look guiltier than I already do? I don't think so." The bodyguards moved in around Johnny as he stepped from the church. The sea of faces and cameras surged like an incoming tide toward the steps, shouts, and the buzz and click of cameras drowning out Edwin's comments and the orders he barked at the bodyguards as he elbowed his way through a line of police and a group of teenage girls who had managed to get beyond the barricade. As the limo door swung open, Johnny got into the dark car and sank into the seats as the outside noise became muted by the insulated steel wrapped around him. Ted Weir, the assistant district attorney, had remained in the limo throughout the services. Sitting next to Johnny, he gazed out at the pushing, shoving crowd and shook his head, grinning. Damn. Who would have thought it, huh? When the two of us played football in school, I figured you'd go on to college on a football scholarship and then come back to work on the slopes if you didn't make it in the pros. Me? I figured I might make it through school by the skin of my teeth and come back to do so and work at my old man's auto parts shop. Now here we are, you the hottest hunk in the country and me humping to bust crackheads and child molesters. The car eased through the crowd as Johnny continued to search the faces that peered back at him, eager for a glimpse of their idol but unable to see anything but the reflection of their own hopeful expressions. You know, Johnny, keeping shut mouth about this investigation is only gonna get harder. And frankly, I'm surprised that the boss is even going along with it. Phil Singer is thinking about his own ass, Ted. If he comes out and informs the media that Senator Foster is being investigated for murdering Dolores and attempting to murder me, he's going to feel more heat than the O.J. Simpson jury. Let's face it. Not every day a state senator is accused of murder. This could be just another of your ploys to cover your butt and at the same time bring the man down for what he's done regarding the reservation's resort and casino issue. Dolores had proof of Foster's involvement with Formation Media. Foster found out about it and tried to have us both killed. Dolores had proof. Whatever proof she had burned up in that car wreck, Johnny. If Senator Foster was somehow involved in your accident, he got exactly what he wanted. He destroyed your evidence and has made you look like a reckless crackhead. My blood tests will prove otherwise. So what? Hell, you could just as easily have been Dolores's supplier. Ted shrugged. One very positive side note. You have no history of drug usage. Right? Johnny looked back out the window, at the businesses crowded with tourists, men wearing Bermuda shorts with cameras hanging from long straps around their necks and women whose faces were partially hidden under straw-brimmed hats or visors. They glanced curiously at the limo as it crept through the traffic. Right, Johnny? Ted repeated. Right, he finally replied. Inspector Chuck Parker had put on 40 pounds since the night he'd tackled Johnny out near White Sands. Johnny had always suspected that Officer Parker had done much to dissuade the irate Texan, whose Cadillac and girlfriend Johnny had hijacked on a whim, from pressing charges of auto theft against him. Parker's hair had thinned and grayed and he'd grown a substantial mustache that exaggerated the puffiness of his cheeks. By the looks of his red eyes and flushed face, Johnny suspected high blood pressure. His weight wouldn't help matters. Parker put a cup of hot black coffee in front of Johnny, then took a seat across the table, next to Robert Anderson, Johnny's attorney. Johnny sipped at the steaming Java, and winced. Still tastes like old gym socks, Parker. I thought you'd appreciate it, Johnny. Brings back old memories, huh? There were times I thought you were going to feed me this stuff intravenously. Anything to get your head straight. Parker sat back in his chair and laced his fat fingers over his belly. I hoped we'd never see you back in this place. 13 years is a long time to go without getting in trouble, you gotta admit. This is hardly petty stuff, is it? Hardly, Anderson joined in. He tapped the table with one finger as he studied Parker's face. Are you arresting my client, Inspector? If not, why are we here? Thought you'd like to know that forensics has possible proof that someone ran you off of that road, like you said. They've located gouge marks and scrapes on the driver's side of the car that would indicate a collision of some sort with another automobile. There are also dents in the back fender, as well as broken taillights. They'll take paint samples. The car was black. You don't need paint samples to determine that, Johnny pointed out. Okay. You want to tell me again why you think Foster is behind this? Who the hell else has reason to shut me and Dolores up? Granted, you've been pretty vocal about your displeasure of his handling the gambling issue. But hell, Johnny. That's an ongoing argument that, while hot, is hardly enough to warrant murder. Since Foster took office, he's been an opponent of reservation casino gambling in this state. He feels it gives the Native Americans too much power. God forbid the sickening unemployment on these reservations gets wiped out. God forbid families have the money to feed and clothe their children properly. Educate the Indians and they're liable to vote him out of office and shut down his aspirations of running for president. Johnny shoved his coffee away. A little too convenient that he suddenly does an about-face after the resort went belly up and reverted to formation media. Now he's supposed to invite statewide gambling because he thinks it's a good thing for the people? He shook his head. There's not much hope of the Native Americans becoming involved considering we all lost our butts on the Apache casino and resort. Lot of folks feel that gambling corrupts. So do poverty and ignorance and sickness. Parker sat forward, his elbows propped on the table. He toyed with a book of matches and remained silent for a while. Finally, he said, "Let me get this straight. You think Foster took a bribe from Formation Media to stall the construction completion on the resort long enough so the resort was unable to open in time. Therefore, the resort consortium was unable to make their loan payment to Formation, who then acted on the loan default and took control of the development. Somehow Dolores found the proof that she needed to link Foster to Formation. He learned about it and attempted to kill you both, or had someone do it for him." Parker looked skeptical. That makes no sense. With the shutdown of construction on that project, Formation has lost its ass. Why would Formation shoot itself in the foot? Insurance, Anderson provided. Not good enough. Johnny shook his head. Insurance wouldn't provide a profit. They would be lucky to get back what they had already spent. Johnny pushed back his chair and stood up. He proceeded to pace. Formation is a giant in resort development. 8 of the last 6 mega resorts have been developed and financed by Formation. Toronto, Vegas, Atlantic City. Over the last 5 years they've gobbled up the competition by buying out the New York and the Bellagio before it even completed construction. In Atlantic City they moved in on the Trump Taj Mahal and Harrah's. There were rumors that they attempted to bully their way into Branson, but it didn't happen. They want tight control over major competition. Maybe they thought that the Apache resort would ultimately cut into the Vegas traffic. Or maybe they decided the resort was too ripe a plum not to own it 100%. Either way, they got to Foster. Maybe they promised to finance his next election. Or, more important, his bid for the presidency. I know for a fact that there is only one thing Foster worships more than money, and that's power. He'd sell his soul to eternal damnation if he thought it would buy him the White House. We have to find Dolores's contact, Anderson said. That might be tough, Parker replied. If he suspects that the cause of the wreck was intentional, he's not likely to put himself in jeopardy again. Johnny looked around, frowning. If he's smart, he's left the country. If Foster was aware that Dolores had discovered he's dirty by way of a snitch, then he must also know who the snitch is. All the more reason we sit on this information a while longer. No way we should allow the press to think this incident was anything more than an accident. Parker drank his coffee and continued to watch Johnny. Dolores never hinted about her contact? Never gave you any indication who was feeding her information? She wanted all the glory to herself. She saw it as a way to get her out of Ruidoso and into the big time. I also think she was protecting her source. Johnny gave Parker a thin smile. Which makes me think her source was someone closer to her than I ever suspected. Dolores wasn't above tossing a baby to lions if she thought it would protect her own interests. Parker took a weary breath and shook his head. She sure got her wish, didn't she? She found a way to get the hell out of Ruidoso. For good. Her eyes closed and every muscle in her body aching. Leah soaked for an hour in hot water and gardenia-scented bubbles, a sweating bottle of white Zinfandel on the floor by the tub, and Neil Diamond crooning to her from the tape deck perched on the dressing table in her bedroom. The phone rang and Shamika ran from the kitchen to answer it, her voice drowned out by Diamond's Brooklyn Roads. Shamika tapped on the door. I'm not home, Leah replied, reaching for her glass of wine and sinking deeper into the tub. Especially if it's Johnny. I don't want to talk to him, Shamika. I don't want to see him. Tell him to go away. It's not Johnny. Frowning, Leah downed the wine. It's Greg Honeycutt from the track. Remember, he was going to call you today about the vet job. God, she'd totally forgotten. With bubbles dripping off her legs, Leah wrapped a towel around her and ran from the bathroom, leaving a trail of soapy water down the hallway. Val sat in his wheelchair before the television, his face brightening with pleasure as Leah grabbed up the receiver and planted a kiss on his forehead. "This is it, Puddin'," she whispered. "Wish me luck." Taking a steadying breath, Leah raised the receiver to her ear. "Hello? Doc Star? Greg Honeycutt here. How you doin', darlin'? Have yourself a good weekend?" She rolled her eyes and rubbed her sore buttocks. "Great, Greg. And you?" "Not bad, not bad. Guess you've heard of Johnny's problems. Hell, it's probably made the news in Bangladesh. Too bad about Miss Rainwater. Shit, when God decides it's time to go, he don't fool around, does he?" "Tragic," she said, her gaze falling on the television screen, where images of Dolores's crushed and burned car were followed by those of a funeral procession arriving at the Catholic Church on the Mescalero Reservation. "We got a message from Johnny about an hour ago. He was the last holdout on your appointment, but he's given us the go-ahead to bring you on." Leah sank to the sofa in relief. "Course you know you'll need to get your state license before you can actually practice on the track. But if you want to come on out tomorrow morning first thing, I'll get you introduced to the trainers and your coworker, Jake Graham." She nodded. "I'll be there, Mr. Honeycutt. Greg darlin'. We don't stand on formalities here. See you at 6 sharp." "Thank you." "Hell, don't thank me yet, Leah. A month from now you might be cussin' my ass for ever gettin' you in this situation." "I won't let you down, Greg." He was silent for a moment, then, "I know you won't, hun. If I'd thought that, I never would have pitched you to the lot of hyenas. Now get you some rest, 'cause you're gonna need it. Bye." Leah hung up the phone and sat back on the sofa. Val watched her with bright, sparkling eyes and a smile. "Mama happy?" She nodded. "Very happy." "Mama give Val a hug?" Grinning, she crossed to her son and lifted him out of his chair, returned to the sofa and cradled him in her lap. Stroking his hair, she focused again on the television at the reporter who stared into the camera and relayed the day's news from the prompter. The media turned up in full force to see Johnny Whitehorse attend the funeral of his fiancée, Dolores Rainwater. Whitehorse was surrounded by bodyguards and legal representatives as he made his way into the church, where the services were attended by Dolores's friends and coworkers here at Channel 10. It is our understanding that Whitehorse spent the hours after the service being questioned by investigators as to the cause of the accident and the drugs that were found in Miss Rainwater's system at the time of her death. According to the DA Phil Singer, Whitehorse has agreed to a polygraph. The DA's office is still waiting on the outcome of the drug tests taken on Whitehorse's blood immediately after the accident. Law enforcement officials as well as the DA's office are keeping tight-lipped about this investigation. They are unprepared at this time to discuss any part of their interview with Whitehorse, and have announced that there will be no forthcoming information until all aspects of his interview have been investigated. Leah watched as Johnny left the church surrounded by bodyguards. Wearing dark glasses and a black suit, he avoided looking directly at the lineup of fans, television camera crews, and the ever-present paparazzi. Reaching for the remote, Leah pointed it at the screen and hit the power button. Standing at the kitchen door, Shamika studied Leah as she cuddled Val close. "Dinner is about ready. You are going to eat, aren't you?" "I'm really not hungry. But thanks anyway. Just what went on with you and Johnny, Leah? You come home this morning looking like you'd been dragged behind a rogue horse, saying nothing, spending the next hours holed up in your room crying your eyes out." Leah stood and swayed, Val's weight throwing her off balance slightly as she moved toward the kitchen. "I got the job at the track. I begin assisting Jake Graham in the morning. Isn't that great? With a decent paycheck coming in here twice a month, maybe we can eat something more substantial than macaroni and cheese 4 nights a week. Val and I happen to like macaroni and cheese. Don't we, pal?" Shamika pinched Val's cheek as Leah walked by. Leah situated Val in the specially built high chair next to the table and strapped him in. I understand Jake is a real hunk. 38 years old. Divorced. No kids. Great sense of humor. Shamika picked up a plate of fried pork chops and a bowl of mashed potatoes from the stove and set them on the table between a platter of hot water cornbread and a pitcher of tea. I don't care about Jake Graham. I want to know what's up with you and Johnny. Leah headed for the bedroom, dragging the damp towel off and tossing it in the vicinity of the bathroom door. As she dug through her lingerie drawer for her cotton pajamas, Shamika entered the room, stopping short at the sight of Leah's scraped and bruised back. Good God, girl, you fall off that damned horse or what? Which one? She grinned and stepped into the pajama bottoms. The white horse or the paint? This isn't funny, Leah. Just what went on between you two? Jerking the cotton top out of the drawer and tugging it over her head, Leah turned on Shamika so suddenly that Shamika stepped back in surprise. He fucked me, girlfriend. That's it in black and white. I went to him to offer comfort and reassurance. I naively thought that my giving him my body would alleviate his pain over Dolores and all the hurt he experienced over my breaking his heart those many years ago. Can you believe I was so arrogant to think that such a sacrifice would appease his turmoil? Guess he showed me. I simply got a little taste of what it's like to be humiliated by the one you so desperately love. She returned to the kitchen, dropped into a chair next to Val's and reached for a patty of hot, crisp cornbread, which she covered in butter, then broke into tiny pieces and put on a plate before her son, who watched her with serious eyes. Shamika took the chair across from her and picked up the bowl of potatoes. So when are you seeing him again? Probably never. Since she glanced at Val and shrugged. He didn't speak to me the entire journey back to his grandfather's. He had a lot on his mind, Shamika pointed out. He hasn't called. There was his meeting with the police and the district attorney, not to mention Dolores's funeral. The man is probably wrung out. God only knows what his lawyers and agents have been heaping on him the last several hours as well. He always called. Always. Just to make certain I was okay and to tell me how much he loved me. He's not a starry-eyed love-struck kid any longer, Leah. There's a lot to consider. Same with you. She smiled and looked at Val as she popped a piece of cornbread into his mouth. You told him about Val yet? She shook her head. Why not? No reason to. Not yet. The way things ended, I'll probably never see Johnny again. Maybe that's just as well. Then you wouldn't have to tell him about Val's disability, Don't start. She stabbed a pork chop and began tearing at it with a dull knife. Yep. Better it end this way, Leah. Then you don't have to face the fear of him dumping you because he doesn't want the responsibility of becoming involved with a woman with a handicapped child. Of course, you could always give Sam a call. It's obvious the man adores you, and he has no problem with Val. Maybe you could learn to love him in time? I mean, if you have no intention of allowing the one you really love into your life because you're just too big a coward to risk his reaction, what alternative do you have other than to spend the rest of your life alone? Leah shoved back from the table, unbuckled Val's straps, and lifted him out of his chair. She kicked open the back screen door and left the house, entered the barn and allowed the smells of rich hay and manure to slide through her system like a sedative. The pair of pygmy goats trotted out of a stall and let loose a noisy squalling of bleats that made Val raise his head and grin. Val see goats? Sure. She smiled and sat down in the barn aisle, resting Val on her crossed legs. The goats waddled toward them, curled tails flickering from side to side in pleasure, each shaking their little horned heads and skipping sideways in their excitement to be petted. Val squealed and squirmed, causing Leah to laugh as the black and white spotted Billy climbed into Val's lap and proceeded to lick his cheek. Taking Val's hand, Leah gently stroked it across the goat's back, inviting the little beast to peer at Val with a kind of adoration that caused her son to sigh in pleasure. Goat likes Val? Of course. See? He's smiling. The goat bawed and nestled closer, pawed at Val's chest and peered with its odd yellow eyes with their thin, horizontal pupils into the child's face. "He's saying he loves you," Leah whispered and scratched the billy under his chin. "He says he's your friend." Val laughed again as the goat tugged on his shirt, demanding more strokes. His laughter sounded sweet as birdsong, like that of any normal 7-year-old. Hugging him close and laying her cheek against the top of his head, she said more to herself than to Val, "I got a job today that's going to pay me real money. We'll be able to buy you a bigger wheelchair, maybe a powered one that you can learn to drive yourself. But most important, we can try out the injections of Botox. Sometimes they help to supple your muscles. Then petting the old Billy here wouldn't be so hard. You could even give him a hug. I'm sure he would love that, to feel your arms around him." "Mama hug Val?" She turned Val to face her and wrapped her arms around him tightly as his head rested on her shoulder. She felt his body stiffen as he tried desperately to raise his arms around her neck, knowing even as he struggled it was not going to happen. The foal in the stall at the far end of the barn nickered and Val's smile widened. "Horse, please," he said. Leah stood and moved to the stall where Johnny's mare and foal both whinnied in greeting. The swelling on the mare's stifle had improved tremendously. She would be sure to call Roy first thing in the morning and remind him that he could take the pair back to Whitehorse Farm, and she would suggest that he find another vet. She simply would not have time for private practice when she began working at the track. "Val pet?" Leah shoved open the stall door and stepped in. Val's body strained and swayed, his flesh turning warm from his exertion as he attempted to lift his hand toward the mare. "Val fly." Smiling, Leah moved to the mare's side. The horse turned its beautiful dished head and nuzzled Val's hand, her big brown eyes regarding him with a softness that made Leah's throat tighten. Turning his eyes up to Leah's, Val repeated, "Val fly?" "I don't understand," she said. "You want to pet, no?" "Val fly." He squirmed his body closer to the mare and his hands opened just enough to grab fistfuls of mane. "Val fly," he cried. Leah peeled his fingers out of the horse's mane and struggled to hold him as he bucked and flailed his body against her. She stumbled from the stall as he wailed, looking around frantically as Shamika ran down the aisle. Shamika grabbed his hands and held them firmly. "Hush. Hush now. Val want fly. Val want horse." "You are not to scream," Shamika said firmly, looking into his face. "Be nice, Val, or you'll go to your corner." He closed his eyes tightly and wailed again, the sound intensified by the metal barn. Shamika took him from Leah, her strong arms entrapping his. "Okay, buddy. You know the price for tantrums. Off we go." Shamika marched out of the barn as Val peered back at Leah over Shamika's shoulder, his big blue eyes brimming with tears. By the time Leah entered the house, Shamika had situated Val in his wheelchair and sat him facing a blank wall. Shamika returned to the kitchen table and pointed to Leah's plate of cold chops and potatoes. "Sit and eat. Don't look at me like that. You cannot allow him to throw fits. He's just a child. Just because he's disabled doesn't mean he's allowed to act any differently than any other 7-year-old who throws temper tantrums. Let him get away with that kind of behavior and you'll soon have a problem on your hands. Try wrestling a 100-pounder who gets pissed because he doesn't get his way." Leah sank into the chair, glancing again into the living room where Val sat silently, head fallen to one side as he stared at the wall. He must be hungry. He'll eat just as soon as he's had time to think about his behavior. I don't understand what set him off. I'll tell you what set him off. Shamika spread butter on her fried cornmeal patty. He wants to ride. Leah sank back in the chair. Don't get that stubborn look on your face, Doc Star. Your son wants to ride. Simple as that. He enjoys it. I don't blame him for being angry. It's the one thing he does that rewards him with a sense of freedom and accomplishment. He said it himself. To ride is to fly. As Shamika ate her cornbread, she studied Leah's face. Just what are you so frightened of? He's too damn vulnerable, Shamika. He can't catch a cold without suffering for it. A fall from a horse, he's not going to fall. You can't guarantee that. You can't guarantee that he's not going to fall out of his bed or his wheelchair or choke on a noodle, for heaven's sake. Shamika reached for her iced tea. It's the guilt thing, isn't it? You still blame yourself for his condition. If you allowed him to ride and something happened, you'd blame yourself, again. You think by smothering him with safety you're going to somehow make up for giving birth to him 3 months early. How many times do the doctors have to assure you that his condition is no fault of yours? It was the hospital staff who brought in that germ, Leah. You sued them. They admitted fault and paid you $1 million. The annuity check you receive each month should be a reminder that you are in no way to blame for Val's brain damage. Shamika left her chair and rummaged through a kitchen drawer. She tossed a stack of papers and brochures on the table next to Leah's plate. At least read the stuff with an open mind. Come out to Rockaway and watch the children ride. The instructors and volunteers are incredible. Their highest priority is safety. Smiling, Shamika added, do it for Val. Leah sat cross-legged in the middle of her bed, the stack of information on one side, her plate of food on the other. She nibbled on the pork chop and flipped through the papers until finding one titled, Advantages of Riding for the Disabled. Riding, like swimming, can be done with crutches discarded. Confidence is achieved or strengthened by the discipline of learning to ride and control a horse. Particularly in the case of children with spastic muscles, riding is an extension of physiotherapy treatment. Symmetry of the body is helped by the necessity to sit evenly on the horse. Trunk rotation is facilitated. The rhythmical motions of the horse help relax spastic muscles, and improvement in hand function is motivated by the need to acquire the skill of using the reins. The command, look between the horse's ears, is a marvelous exercise for head control. Riding can improve posture and trunk balance. The smells and sights and sounds of the outdoors are made available to these children, who would find it difficult or impossible to negotiate a trail with crutches or a wheelchair. For once they are looking down on people instead of looking up. They are doing something only a few of their peers have an opportunity to do. A warm relationship with and an appreciation of the horse help a child emotionally, and sometimes speech is stimulated by this novel experience. The contact with volunteer helpers is a further plus and also gives those who have had little to do with the handicapped an appreciation of their abilities as well as their needs. Most of all, it is fun. We all need outdoor recreation, and riding is one of the few suitable to the disabled. She tossed the chop onto the plate and flipped through several more brochures. Falls are very rare, but can and do happen. Do not panic if there is a fall. These children fall frequently in all types of situations. They fall on sidewalks, off swings, etc. The fall off the horse is really not any worse than any they could get at home. The job of the sidewalker is to maintain the balance of the rider when he cannot maintain it himself. Some students, especially in the beginning stages, have a definite balance problem off the horse as well as on. Depending on the degree of difficulty, there will be either 1 or 2 sidewalkers assigned to the student. The instructors will inform you as to the requirements of the particular student. For an example, some students will not have to be held all the time, but just have to have someone walking beside them for emergencies. Others will be held onto by means of the safety belt attached around their waists with a handhold at the back. Wearily, Leah lay back on her pillows and gazed out her open window, into the dark. The night sounds were a hypnotic drone that made her lids grow heavy and her sore muscles relax. A lifetime ago she would have climbed out of her bed and roamed the barns in bare feet and pajamas, allowing the contented sighs of resting horses to fill her with a magic that inspired her to dream. The barns had been her escape even then, a place of refuge, safety, and sanity, away from the unhappiness that vibrated the air between her parents. Leah rolled out of bed and moved down the corridor toward the back door, passing Val's room, pausing long enough to hear Shamika reading aloud and Val struggling to repeat the words after her. Occasionally Leah read to Val herself, but never with the success that Shamika had. To Val, Mama meant playtime, kisses and cuddle time, fairy tales and laughter. Shamika meant business, concentration, effort. By the time she finished the poky little puppy, Val would be more than happy to shut his eyes and sleep. Closing the screen door quietly behind her, Leah eased down the steps and headed for the barn. A single light burned at the far end, mostly for the goat's sake. They didn't care for the dark. Lying on a bale of hay, they jumped up at first sight of her and came prancing down the aisle, bleating their vociferous greetings and side-kicking in excitement. She dropped to her knees and held out her arms. They licked her face and chattered in pleasure as she scratched between their horns, causing their upper lips to roll back in ecstasy, revealing their toothless upper gums and black-spotted pink tongues. Leah laughed and buried her face into the billy's woolly coat, laughing harder as he took a mouthful of her hair and began to chew. Suddenly they jumped away and skittered down the aisle, bleating loudly enough to make Leah cover her ears. Then she realized, someone was standing behind her. Chapter 16. Johnny. Leah nudged aside the insistent Billy and stood. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my girl." "What do you think I'm doing here?" Self-consciously, Leah glanced down at her pajamas, imprinted with tiny red prancing horses as well as goat footprints and hay. Leaning against the open barn door, hands in his trouser pockets and his black suit coat caught behind his wrists, Johnny gave her a lazy grin. "I always imagined slipping you out of lingerie. But I had something a little more risque in mind than PJs stenciled with little horses. Sorry to blow your fantasy. I doubt you could look any sexier if you were dressed in Fredericks of Hollywood." He eased down the aisle in that slow walk of his that had always made her feel hypnotized. "I didn't expect to see you," she said breathlessly. "Because I didn't call? You always called. I had a lot to think about. I saw the news about the funeral. I didn't come here to discuss funerals. I've seen and heard enough about death the last few days. I came here to apologize for my behavior last night. I was angry and I took it out on you." Johnny reached for her. She stepped away, more out of instinct than nervousness, then reminded herself that this was Johnny Whitehorse. She had nothing to fear from him. He reached again, catching her arm and tugging her close. The expensive cloth of his suit brushed her skin as softly as a breath. His cloud of black hair, spilling over his black suit and shirt, made his skin look rich as mahogany and his eyes dark as onyx. The tender yet insistent pressure of his fingers on her arm made her knees go weak, and she sank against him as if every bone and muscle in her body had become water. "I was prepared to never see you again," she confessed, her head against his shoulder, her eyes drifting closed as he wrapped his long arms around her and gently rubbed her back. "At least I thought I was. Now that you're here, I realize that I would probably have gone to you, even if you told me that you never wanted to see me again. You were always too stubborn for your own good, Leah." He kissed her temple and breathed in her ear. "Wanna make love in the feed room?" She grinned. "The next time we make love, sweetheart, it's going to be in a bed with champagne and caviar." "Oh dear. I don't like caviar." "Fine. Then champagne and Ritz crackers with Squeeze-It cheese spread." Laughing, Leah looked up into his intense eyes. "You remembered. How can a guy forget something as romantic as Squeeze-It cheese spread, for God's sake? Except." He ran his hand under the waistband of her pajama bottoms, over her buttock, cupping it firmly with his fingers. "The next time we share Squeeze-It, I'm gonna educate you on the finer things you can do with it. You'll never look at a can of that stuff the same way again." Leah laughed, lifted her arms around his neck, and went to her tiptoes to brush his lips with a kiss. Only he turned his face away slightly and eased her arms down, setting her back on her heels. His expression appeared strained, the lines around his eyes more evidence of the stress and emotional turmoil he had experienced the last few days. "There's something wrong." She touched his cheek. "Life sucks." He grinned wearily. "What's the old saying? Life's a bitch and then you die. But we're together again. How can that be bad?" Stepping away, she studied the slant of his mouth and the odd dullness of his eyes. Is there something you're not telling me, Johnny? Nothing we need to discuss tonight. He turned away and walked to the barn door. Before him, in the distance, stretched White Horse Farm. The distant lights of the house twinkled like golden stars against the black night. Funny how things change with time, he mused thoughtfully. Once I stood in this same place and looked out at your house, wishing I could hold you. Now here we are. I'm here and you're here and I'm too damn afraid to hold you. Partially turning, he looked back at her, and his eyes were sharp, his lips curled in something less than a smile. I'm going in the house now to meet your son. She felt the blood drain from her face, and her mouth went dry. Johnny walked from the barn, leaving Leah standing in the glare of the barn's yellow bug lights, the goats tugging at her pajama legs, her heart pounding in her throat like a jackhammer. The overwhelming urge to run after him, to postpone the inevitable, made tears sting her eyes, not from nervousness, but from shame. She felt sickened by the very thought that she was embarrassed for him to know that her son was less than perfect. The screen door slammed. Shamika's voice wormed its way through Leah's haze, then Johnny's, deeper, words that distance turned into a drone of indistinct syllables, then silence. At last, she followed, goats at her heels, her body shaking as she mounted the steps and reached for the door. Shamika opened it for her and smiled into her eyes. I'm getting everyone ice cream. Want some? The goats darted past Leah, into the house. She watched them trot through the kitchen and down the hallway straight to Val's room. No, she shook her head. Shamika walked to the refrigerator, opened the freezer and dug through the frozen dinners and ice trays before extracting the half-gallon tub of cookies and cream. She laid out 2 bowls and proceeded to fill them. You look like someone just cracked you over the head with a tire rod, Leah. Relax. They're going to hit it off just fine. But he doesn't know. Shamika glanced at her with a smugness that made Leah frown. Of course he knows, Leah. He's known all along. Leah slowly blinked and shook her head. What are you saying? That's impossible. He called here one day last week to speak to you. You were out at the barn or something. We talked. You told him? Her voice quivered. Nope. She licked her fingers and replaced the lid on the tub. Your mother told him. Seems they kept in touch right up until she died. Shamika returned the ice cream to the freezer, picked up a bowl and extended it to Leah. He knew everything, Leah. About your marriage, the birth of your son, your divorce. He also understands your fear. He never said. He wanted you to tell him. Her hands shook as she took the bowl and moved to Val's room, pausing at the door to watch Johnny sit in the rocking chair next to the window, her son in his lap. Val's face beamed with pleasure, and it occurred to Leah in that instant that the precious child whose face was rosy with excitement probably could not remember the last time a man had held him. Johnny looked up. Whatever intensity had hardened his eyes earlier was gone, replaced with a twinkling mischievousness that made him appear childlike himself. Look who's here, Val. Mom. Wearing pajamas with horses on them. She's brought me some ice cream. Val's smile widened and he rolled his head to look up at Johnny. Val's ice cream, he said. Frowning, Johnny shook his head. No. My ice cream, pal. Cookies and cream happens to be my favorite. Val's ice cream, pal. Val laughed as Johnny gave him an exasperated expression. Val share? I'm not sure we'll have anything to share if your mom doesn't stop standing there staring at us. Johnny and Val looked at her expectantly, and Leah moved into the room that seemed in that moment to be surreal. The dim light playing on the posters of Rudolph Valentino on the wall, the goats curled up and comfortable on the end of Val's bed, Johnny Whitehorse and her son wrapped up together in her grandmother's old chair before an open window where night wind billowed Sesame Street curtains. Handing over the bowl, her gaze locked on Johnny's, Leah gave him a trembling smile. I think I'm going to cry. Don't cry, he replied softly. Just get yourself a bowl of ice cream and join us. Coming right up, Shamika said from the door. She entered the room with 2 bowls and handed one to Leah. As for me, I'm off to bed. Keep the party noise down and remember that Val has school tomorrow and Leah starts her new job. Leah sat on the bed, rested the bowl on her lap, and watched Johnny spoon ice cream into her grinning son's mouth. Then he took a bite, making Val's smile grow even broader. Emotion swelled in her chest. It buzzed in her head and burned like nettles behind her eyes. At last, the two people she loved most in the world were together in one room, some palpable connection vibrating the air between them so strongly it turned the space around them a soft glowing white. Ice cream finished, Johnny set the bowl aside and left the chair, easily handling Val's weight as he carried the boy to the bed and tucked him under the covers, poked a big bird doll in beside him and kissed him on the cheek. "Johnny stay?" Val asked, the hope in his voice undeniable. "No." "Johnny come back, see Val?" "Yes." "When?" "Soon." "When?" "Tomorrow." Val grinned. "Not soon enough." Johnny laughed and tousled Val's brown hair. "You sound like your mother." "I'll call you." "Promise." "I promise, Val. Now go to sleep. You have school tomorrow." Still smiling, Val closed his eyes, pretending sleep, but peering at Johnny and Leah as Johnny turned away from the bed and took the bowl from Leah's hand, directing her toward the bedroom door and out into the hall. "He's fibbing, you know." "He isn't asleep," Leah said. "I know." He escorted her to her own bedroom, over to her bed. "Does this mean I'm about to get lucky?" she asked, dropping down onto the edge of the mattress as Johnny pulled a chair over in front of her and sat down. The ice cream had mostly melted. He stirred it around until the chocolate chunks began to dissolve into rivulets of rich brown streaks, then he raised a spoonful of it to her mouth. "Eat," he ordered her. "And while you do, I'm going to say something. I like your son. He looks like you. I'm sorry about his situation, but it doesn't mean I think less of either of you, or pity you, or am turned off by the idea of having a relationship with you, either of you. We're all handicapped in a way. I'm an Indian. I know what prejudice and ostracism is. I know what it feels like to not fit in. You, on the other hand, are handicapped by your fear of rejection because of Val's problems. Did you honestly think I could love you less because of Val? What's a woman supposed to think when even Val's own father couldn't cope? The man's an immature ass, and if you're judging all men beside him, then you do us one hell of an injustice, especially me, considering our past together. Richard Starr should be castrated, or at the least given a good punch in the nose. When is the last time he saw Val? 2.5 years ago. Does he send you child support? No. Want me to find him and break his legs? He grinned. I don't think so, she grinned back. Johnny put the bowl aside and took Leah's face between his hands. I wish he were mine, he told her softly, and lightly kissed her mouth, making her quiver with feelings that scattered through her like dandelion fluff in a wind. Weightless, spiraling, dancing to all corners of the universe. Then he pulled away, left the chair and moved toward the door. Will you stay? She called out a little desperately. I can't, Leah. I have something to do. Leah followed him to the front door, moving onto the porch as he jumped off the steps and headed for his truck. What could be so important this late at night? I have to see Dolores's family. They're holding her burial ceremony tonight. Can I come? She asked, stopping him in his tracks. Obscured by the dark, Johnny looked around. You would do that? I can be ready in 5 minutes. Yes, then. His voice sounded weary but relieved. I'd like to, Leah. A bonfire roared on the front lawn of Dolores's mother's 4-room frame house. A scattering of relatives sat cross-legged around the fire, faces somber as they spoke together softly. Dolores's mother, Bernice, sat alone by a pile of Dolores's neatly folded clothes, which would be burned soon after Dolores was buried. At her back was her daughter's open coffin, a simple pine box, not the expensive mahogany casket lined with pale blue silk that Johnny had purchased, containing Dolores's body now completely wrapped in bright blankets. Upon leaving the truck, Johnny removed his suit coat and tossed it into the backseat. He loosened his tie, flipped open the top button of his black shirt, and rolled the sleeves up his forearms. He glanced at Leah, where she stood in the dark. "You can stay in the truck if you want," he told her. "I'm here for support, remember?" She tried to smile. The Rock of Gibraltar can hardly do its job if it's cowering in the background, can it? This could get ugly. The family never approved of me much, especially after I moved off the reservation. They saw me as a bad example and believed I influenced Dolores to turn her back on her people and pursue life in the white man's world. Then maybe you shouldn't. I have a responsibility. Johnny moved toward the light. Leah fell in beside him. Silence fell over the group as Johnny moved into the firelight. Leah dropped back as he approached Bernice Rainwater, his head slightly bowed, his eyes averted. Bernice stood. Stopping before her, his eyes still not meeting hers, he spoke softly in Apache. "I've come here to offer you my condolences. My sorrow is deep for the loss of your daughter. I cared for her very much." Bernice drew back her hand, then slapped his cheek hard enough to rock him back. Then she slapped the other, and spat on his chest. "You have murdered my girl, Whitehorse, and brought the ruin of this family. How am I to live now that she is gone and can no longer give me money?" "I'm obligated to provide for you," he replied in a sharp tone, his eyes still not meeting hers. Bernice was an elder, after all, and to look at her directly, considering he was involved in Dolores's death, would have been a greater insult than slapping her. "This family deserves more from Johnny than money," came an angry voice. Johnny looked around as Billy Rainwater, Dolores's brother, stepped between Johnny and Bernice. The younger man had painted his face for war, and he held a knife in each hand. "I demand retribution," Billy slurred through his teeth, his breath smelling heavily of whiskey. "As Dolores's brother, it's my right to fight you." "I won't fight you, Billy. The old laws no longer apply, then you're no Apache." He kicked dirt over Johnny's shoes and sneered. "But you've not been Apache in a very long time. Your interest in your sister comes too late for me to take you seriously," Johnny replied. "As does your apparent grief. I find it ironic that you and your mother wouldn't see her or speak to her for the last several years because you didn't approve of her lifestyle, yet you happily took her money when she offered it. It was the least she could do for breaking my mother's heart. Would you have her remain here and languish in this poverty? She was an Apache. Apache was something to be proud of, once, when this land was ours and our homes were wherever our hearts led us, when we were warriors to be respected and feared. Do you take pride in this?" He pointed to the line of shabby, cookie-cutter houses built 50 years ago, with yards cluttered with rusting automobiles that lay shadowed in the dark like the bones of long-dead buffalo. "You drink yourself to oblivion every night and are too damned hungover in the morning to work. Dolores gave you money to go to college, and what did you do with it? Spent it on whores and chivas. You could have gone to medical school like you once wanted, but you allowed the old ones to convince you to stay for the sake of keeping the tradition and culture alive. How can you keep a culture alive when it's squirming in Malays and Jack Daniels? For that matter, who the hell wants to keep such a culture alive? Where is the pride and dignity in dying before you're 40 of cirrhosis of the liver, or suicide? Do you really think the world out there is going to listen to an uneducated drunk when he stands up to decry this reservation situation? They won't respect you, Billy. They'll pity you. Since when did the Apache crave the pity instead of the respect of a white man?" Billy swung at Johnny. Johnny jumped back as the knife blade sliced within inches of his face. "Stop this." A tall, slim-hipped woman in faded jeans and a plaid cowboy shirt tied at her midriff planted her hands against Billy's chest and shoved him back. He tripped and fell, sprawling heavily into the dirt at his mother's feet. "Idiot," she hissed, and kicked his leg. "What do you think you're doing? You shame me for your stupidity, not to mention your drunkenness. If you truly cared about showing respect for our sister, you would have laid off the Jack Daniels tonight." The woman turned on Johnny, her dark eyes snapping with emotion, her waist-length black hair swirling around her shoulders. "As for you." She glanced past Johnny to Leah, who remained nervously in the distance. What the hell are you doing bringing her here? His eyes narrowing, Johnny looked her up and down. Savannah? What's wrong, Whitehorse? You look like you've just seen a mountain spirit up close and personal. She propped her fists on her hips. Long time no see, you arrogant son of a bitch. So much for dropping me a postcard from the Big Apple. He opened and closed his mouth, refusing to believe that the shapely, beautiful young woman before him was Savannah Rainwater, Dolores's sister. The last time I saw you, you were 30 pounds overweight, 4 inches shorter, and were fighting a bad case of puberty acne. That was 10 years ago. I've grown up. And you haven't answered my question. What is Leah doing here? She was a friend of Dolores's, don't bullshit me, Whitehorse. Dolores hated Leah Foster with an Apache passion. And to top that off, you've been plastered all over the news trying to castrate her father. Don't tell me you and the senator are in bed together now. Hardly. He grabbed her arm and pulled her to one side, ignoring Billy's rambling. He glanced again at Leah, doing his best to reassure her with a smile as she stared at him and frowned. So it's true. Savannah yanked her arm away. Dolores was right. You're back together with Leah. You dumped my sister. I didn't dump your sister, Vanna. The fact is I had no intention of it, at least not at the time. Leah and I have just, after Dolores died, she moved in on you like a copperhead on a lazy field mouse. She shook her head. Dee was always afraid this would happen. She knew you had never gotten over Leah. She told me just a few days ago that she suspected something was going on between you. I wasn't aware you two were even in contact. Where the hell have you been the last few years? Here and there. I came home when I heard about the accident. Savannah crossed her arms and again looked past Johnny. He turned as Leah moved up beside him, her gaze locked on Dolores's sister. Savannah? Leah smiled and extended her hand. My gosh, I hardly recognize you. It's wonderful to see you again. Savannah stared, ignoring her hand. I'm sorry about Dolores. Leah lowered her arm. I'll bet. Just like you were sorry when you stole Johnny away from Dee in high school. Leah set her jaw and raised one eyebrow. I see you're still cursed with an attitude. I thought you might have mellowed over the years. And I didn't come here to see two women get in a goddamn catfight, Johnny interrupted, grabbing them each by an arm and hauling them toward his truck. In the last 5 minutes I've had my face slapped twice, been spat upon, and had my nose nearly cut off by a drunken Indian. My temper is slightly on edge, so I suggest the two of you draw back your claws and shut up. Reaching the back of the truck, he lowered the tailgate and set Leah and Savannah on it side by side. Then he paced, dragging one hand through his hair. We're all here for the same reason, for God's sake. Dolores is dead. Pointing one finger at Savannah, he added, and don't sit there and pretend you and she were tight again. Dolores herself told me you haven't spoken in years. She didn't even know where the hell you were. The last time the two of you were in the same room you about clawed each other's eyes out, according to Dolores. Savannah looked off into the dark. Leah took a weary breath and released it. I knew I shouldn't have come. I start a job at 6 in the morning and it's nearly midnight now. I've only provoked more anger. It's not your fault, Savannah said more softly, yet still refusing to look at Leah or Johnny. Dolores never stood a chance in hell of landing Johnny Whitehorse. No one did except you. She knew it. She accepted it, I think. With Dee it was more of the chase, trying to prove herself by outdoing someone else. By being the best, not just in everyone else's eyes, but in her own. She simply couldn't get beyond the fact that she was an Indian. She never felt equal. It made her take stupid risks. She turned her big eyes up to Johnny's. Whatever caused that accident? I'm sure it had nothing to do with your carelessness. Or because you were drinking or taking drugs. My God, you're the finest role model we've ever hoped to have, Johnny. Since you've become a household name, people have actually appraised us as a people with potential. The problem is, they're now asking, if you can do it, get educated and successful, why can't they all? Your achievements only make the rest of these people look like sluggards and exaggerates their own sense of failure." Laughing, she shook her head and thumbed over her shoulder. "Take Billy for instance. He would never admit that he envies you. With his looks and his smarts, he could have become a fine doctor. But he allowed my mother's cloying demands that he remain here and take care of her after our father died to drain him of his dreams and aspirations. He hates you now because you're a reminder of what he could have been." "It's not too late," Leah said. "It's never too late to change your life for the better. He could still go to school. He's a borderline alcoholic. He'll end up dying just like our father, his insides rotted by whiskey and his mind eaten away by ignorance." She looked at Johnny. "We need to talk." Privately, she stressed, sliding off the tailgate. "I'm leaving tomorrow night. Will you call me in the morning?" Johnny nodded and Savannah walked away. Chapter 17. Jake Graham didn't bother to look up as Leah stepped into his neat, sterile-smelling office with charts of horse anatomies on the walls, framed degrees from universities and veterinary schools, his state license to practice medicine on the track, and photographs of horses streaking across finish lines. With a stethoscope hanging around his neck and his long brown hair falling in a wave over his brow, he was focused on a clipboard of papers, scratching notes on one before flipping through others and writing something else. "You're late, doctor." He turned to a metal filing cabinet and yanked open the drawer. "Rounds start at 6 sharp. It's now 6:35. Your tardiness has put us half an hour behind schedule." Leah opened her mouth to apologize. He slammed the drawer shut and turned on her, jaw unshaven that morning, eyes as clear blue as a mountain spring, and just as icy. She'd heard he wasn't bad to look at. True, in a rugged sort of way, if one liked the Foreign Legion mercenary sort who appeared as if he would rather run you through with a bayonet than say good morning. Whatever qualities might have made him appealing were cancelled out by the intimidation of his scowl and the downward slant of his mouth. Graham shoved the clipboard at her as he walked around her toward the door. "I just got a call from Lorien Farm. Their stakes winner Cool Me Down has a gut problem. Get your ass in gear and follow me." Her face beginning to burn, Leah glanced toward the coffee maker on a table near a water cooler that sported a label from a distillery just outside of town. Graham had every right to be angry, she reminded herself. She'd fallen back to sleep when her alarm went off. If it hadn't been for Shamika dragging her out of bed, she would no doubt still be sleeping or thinking of Johnny and the ridiculous fear she'd experienced over his reaction to Val. She'd spent the better part of the night tossing and turning, not out of worry but over the memory of watching Johnny hold her son, and hearing his words, "I wish he were mine." She hadn't bothered with coffee after her shower to revive her, and without coffee her mind would continue to feel like cotton for another 2 hours. "Star," Jake shouted, causing her to jump and turn away from the coffee pot, toss her purse into a corner, and hurry out the door, into the bracing morning that was barely an hour old. Business was bustling throughout the facility's vast barns. Electric horse walkers hummed as they went round and round with horses walking or jogging on the end of ropes. The high-spirited, muscular animals wore leg wraps around their cannon bones, their glossy bodies sending steam into the cool air. In the distance animals sprinted around the track with jockeys checking them back or driving them on, trainers standing on the sidelines with stopwatches in hand shaking their heads, cursing and shouting directives to the slender young men riding the horses. Leah ran to catch up with Jake Graham, whose long legs made quick time of crossing one barn lot after another. She did her best to read the material Graham had shoved into her hands, not easy considering she was forced to jog just to keep up with Graham. "Clinical diagnosis," she read aloud. "Gastric ulceration hyperkeratosis. The horse is suffering from stomach ulcers. The gastric mucosa looks as if it's been sprayed with buckshot. You'll see the endoscopic evaluation there in the file. He's been on 2,400 milligrams of ranitidine tablets 2 times a day for the last week. He gets nothing more to eat than alfalfa and Timothy hay 4 times a day. Until this morning the abdominal discomfort had abated. We were due to rescope tomorrow. Signs of discomfort this morning? Pawing, lying out flat, looking at his side, camping in back. Colic. Maybe. By the time they reached barn 6, Leah was struggling to breathe. She paused at the door long enough to take a much-needed breath as Graham moved down the barn aisle, glancing back at her with a smugness on his face that made her want to take his stethoscope and palpate him with it. Finally she followed, catching up with him just as he reached the string of stalls belonging to Lorien Farm. A tall, lanky man with faded orange hair that had thinned to a half-dozen strands wrapped over his bald head stood by a sleek black thoroughbred stallion with drawn-in flanks and heaving sides, its head down with nostrils wide and muzzle pinched. His step slowing, Jake looked down at Leah and said quietly but firmly, "Watch. Listen. Do what I tell you to do and nothing more. Don't give Lorien an opinion. Don't even open your mouth. You have no license yet to practice here. If you were to diagnose wrong, that son of a bitch could sue us and the state could close us down quicker than you could wiggle that cute little ass. Understand me?" She nodded, understanding thoroughly. Leah stood back, remaining silent as Graham checked the animal's vital signs: respiration, heart rate, gut sounds, the color of its gums, its temperature. He checked the stall, kicked around the shavings, towed a pile of dung, then glanced into the water bucket, hay and feed bin, then told Lorien to move the horse to the clinic to be palpated. Lorien shook his head. "I'm gonna have to hawk my truck to pay this bill, Jake. Shit, man, that ranitidine alone is costing me $200 a week. Hell, I could go down to Walmart and buy up a bunch of Tums to give this bag of bones." Jake turned on Lorien so fast that Lorien nearly tripped on himself. "Fine, Lorien, you do that. Go buy you some Tums, and while you're at it, a plot to bury the goddamn horse in, because that's what's going to happen if you don't start following my directions in the care of this animal." "Is that it? You trying to kill the horse? You got plenty of insurance on him or what?" Lorien's face went beet red. "What the hell are you accusing me of, Graham? I told you not to be giving that horse grain for a week. There's molasses on his breath and oats in his droppings. You've been graining him, you stupid bastard. He was losing weight. I can't run no damn horse if he's 50 pounds underweight. He won't make it around the goddamn track. He sure as hell isn't going to make it if he's dead, is he?" Jake shouted back, then turned on his heels and stormed from the barn, leaving Leah to take the lead rope from Lorien. He glared at her with sweat running down his temples. "Who the hell are you?" he said through his tobacco-stained teeth. "I'll be assisting Dr. Graham for a while. I'm Dr. Starr." She extended her hand and tried to give him a steady smile. "I'm sure your horse will be fine, Mr. Lorien. I don't give a shit, lady. He ain't won a goddamn dollar since last year, and if you ask me, I'd just as soon put the sombitch down. Je suis. Get the nag outta here, why don't ya?" Lorien walked off, shouting orders to a pair of Hispanic grooms, who scuttled like crabs out of his way. Leah ran her hand along the horse's withers and down its massive shoulder bone, smiling as Cool Me Down raised his head and turned his big dark eyes, reflecting intense pain, on hers. "No wonder you have ulcers," she said, then headed back to the clinic. "There is a swelling on the left that might be a gas pocket, but I don't think so." Leah leaned further into the horse, her eyes closed as she visualized the interior walls of the colon and the location of the spleen and kidneys. The pressure and heat around her arm, all the way to her shoulder, felt uncomfortable if not outright crushing. The gastric ulcerations are probably contributing to his discomfort, but in my opinion I think we're dealing with a nephrosplenic entrapment. The large colon has somehow gotten tossed over the ligament, probably while he was rolling. Leah gently withdrew her arm from the stallion's rectum, peeled the examination sleeve off and tossed it in the trash. Turning to Graham, she said, "You can run another CBC fibrinogen and PCV for total protein, but I suspect they're not going to tell you anything you don't already know. He's anemic and dehydrated, which means this has been going on a while." I suggest a good shot of calcium and a 30-minute turnout on the walker at a trot. The calcium will shrink the colon and the exercise will allow it to shift back into place. Unless the entrapped area is distended by the goddamn grain Lorian has been feeding him. Then you sedate the horse and manipulate the colon rectally. Jake reached into his medicine cabinet for a vial of clear liquid and a syringe, then proceeded to ease the needle into the horse's vein, first drawing back blood to check his efficiency. Tossing the syringe into a canister labeled hazardous waste, he glanced at Leah. You may as well know I think your working here is a bad idea. I don't have to be psychic to figure that out. It's no reflection on your abilities as a fine veterinarian. I've asked around about you. You've got a decent rep. But it's a tough job. You deal with a lot of assholes that could make Hitler cry. Aside from that, there's no place here for feminine emotionalism. She gave him a flat smile. Is that another term for PMS, Dr. Graham? Not at all, Dr. Starr. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee and reached for a stack of files. We're asked to make some tough decisions, not just occasionally, but every day we come to work. And you'd better believe there is going to be somebody in your face at all times. Take Lorian. He trains his own horses, races them, lives in the feed room because he doesn't have the money for rent. He's got half a dozen kids off in Oklahoma or Arkansas that may or may not all be his. He doesn't really care, just as long as there's a wife to give him some sense of purpose. Cool Me Down was a stakes winner last year. Lorian's first to win a major purse. The horse showed every promise of becoming a superstar, blew the hell out of the record books in the following several races. Then it was over. He quit running. There has to be a reason. Aside from the gastric ulcerations, we've found no evidence of anything else. He's just shut down. Leah moved to the horse's head and allowed him to nuzzle her hand. Maybe it's time to turn him out to pasture and let him be a horse for a while. Try telling that to Randy Lorian. Go on. I dare you. That bastard would rather bury the animal than allow it the pleasure of running free in green pastures. After all, what good is having a horse that can't pay for itself? As Leah frowned, Jake laughed and shook his head. Get used to it. This isn't the world of women infatuated with pet horses or some good old boy named Bubba who likes to rope off his favorite quarter on the weekends. Those animals could hop around on 3 legs, and as long as they eat carrots and apples and molasses cookies out of hand and halfway tolerate their owners, they'll live out their lives in comfort until they die of old age. Not here. Not these machines. If they don't pay for themselves, they're useless. The owners can sell them to Alpo for 90 cents a pound and get a small return on their investment. Or if the horse is lucky, he gets put in an auction and maybe someone other than Alpo will find him interesting enough to take a chance on him. That is if he's not already lame or his brains aren't fried by steroids and stress. Jake shouted to an assistant to put Cool Me Down on the walker for 15 minutes. Coming? He asked Leah, then walked out the door. With the radio on low and the DJ suggesting that thanks to El Niño the area was in for the hottest summer on record, Johnny pulled the dually up to the curb outside Bernice Rainwater's house and, reaching across the passenger seat, shoved open the door, allowing the June heat to wash through the cab in a simmering wave. He glanced up at the temp gauge on the rearview mirror, not surprised to see it registering 92 degrees, damn hot for so early in the season. He made a mental note to run the truck by the auto shop to make certain there was plenty of coolant in the engine, and also to check out the air conditioning system at Leah's house. He knew from experience that the small house baked like an oven in this sort of heat. Savannah Rainwater, shielding her eyes from the sun, looked up and down the quiet narrow street before slinging her suitcase into the truck bed, then more gently laying the collection of cameras she had hanging from each shoulder onto the back seat. She climbed up into the truck and slammed and locked the door before reaching for the seatbelt. In the light of day, there was something about her appearance that affected Johnny. Not in the way she was dressed, certainly, in faded jeans and a turquoise cotton blouse, but in her energy and will that seemed to both absorb and reflect the light around her. Her skin was dusky with the slightest hint of copper, and her huge, almond-shaped eyes were the darkest plum purple, which she accentuated with the merest touch of purple shadow on her lids. Her hair had been feathered around her face, the cut drawing the observer's eye to the high cheekbones, and a nose so perfectly formed that, had he not known her better, might have been the result of a very fine plastic surgeon. "I could have rented a car," she told him, grinning. "Driving me to Albuquerque seems excessive, even if we are old friends." He shrugged and turned off the radio. "You said we needed to talk. So I'm here to talk. Good old Johnny on the spot. Mr. Reliable." She laughed and adjusted her seat back, stretched out her long, denim-clad legs and released a weary sigh. "I should never have come home. It was a mistake. Seeing Billy and Mother accomplished nothing more than making me feel guilty again for walking away, especially now that Dee is gone." They drove for a while without talking, until Ruidoso was behind them and the highway stretched like a silver ribbon before them, waves of heat rising from the asphalt, making the oncoming cars resemble mirages. Johnny glanced at Savannah occasionally, thinking to himself that if he had bumped into her on the street he would not have known her. The ugly ducking had certainly turned into a swan, yet there was still that edge of tomboyishness that made him think that she could hold her own against any man who thought he could best her physically in a wrestling match, not to mention romance. This one would not fall in love easily. There was a chip on her shoulder the size of the Sierra Blanca, and he wondered to himself what sort of relationship she had experienced that had stamped wariness and distrust so indelibly over her features. "Ever thought of modeling?" he asked, drawing her attention from the scenery back to him. She shook her head. "Been there and done that. Unlike Dolores, I prefer to be in back of the camera, thank you." "You're into photography, I take it." "Dabble in it a bit," she grinned. "Next time you want a partially nude shot of you taken on Fifth Avenue, give me a call. I do my best work photographing wild animals. Does it pay the bills? Hardly. I work at a casino outside of Toronto. I'm a dealer sometimes. A waitress sometimes. And occasionally I'm one of those annoying photographers who skulk about dark romantic corners of the hotel and snap cozy couples in the throes of hormonal upheavals. The old geezers with young girls are the best. It's fun watching them squirm when they think the wives back home might somehow get their hands on the pictures." Johnny laughed. "So, you're into blackmail?" Savannah wiggled her eyebrows. "The philandering old coots pay handsomely for any snapshot that could be used as evidence against them. You and Dolores have more in common than you think." "Had." She looked out the window. "So tell me, you and Leah getting married? Or is that a stupid question? I haven't thought that far ahead. What about her father? If you go fooling around with Daddy's little girl, he's liable to get angry. He's a lot more powerful now than he was when you were 18. Not to mention corrupt." Shifting in the seat, Savannah looked at Johnny directly. "I mean at Whitehorse. Senator Foster isn't someone to take lightly. He isn't going to stand still for long while you brutalize his reputation. And now Leah's back in the picture. What, exactly, will that do to your fight with him regarding the formation issue?" "I won't back down, Vanna." "Then I assume you'll be forced to make a choice. The love of your life, or your people. The question is, who needs you more? Just how much is Johnny Whitehorse willing to sacrifice?" "I won't back down," he repeated more firmly. "I'm too damn close, Savannah. I had proof in my hand until the accident?" Savannah's voice quivered a little, yet she did not take her gaze from Johnny. "What happened the night Dolores was killed? Don't tell me you were reckless. You're not a reckless man. What sent you off that highway, Johnny? What really caused Dolores's death?" Johnny rode in silence as Savannah watched him, her expression expectant and worried. "She had dirt on Foster," he admitted. "Proof that there was more behind his involvement in closing down the Apache gambling resort than just his great crusade to stop gambling corruption on the reservation and save the Indian from himself. That night after leaving the restaurant, we were forced off the road by another car. Whatever proof she had about the senator burned up in the crash." He said more to himself than to Savannah. I suspected she was getting pretty damn close to discovering something. She hinted occasionally that after she broke the story there wouldn't be a network in this country that wouldn't beg her to work for them. She told you nothing? Johnny shook his head. No way. She wasn't about to risk the information leaking out before she could break it herself. Whatever evidence she got the night of the accident would have, in her own words, blown the lid off the gambling industry as well as Washington. Savannah sank back in the seat and closed her eyes. I was afraid it was something like that. Damn, oh damn. She began to cry. Johnny hit the brakes and eased the truck onto the shoulder of the highway, then shoved the gearshift into neutral before turning to Savannah and taking her face in one hand. You didn't come back to Ruidoso just to pay your condolences to Dolores, did you, Savannah? Let's face it. You and she weren't exactly friendly the last few years. Savannah shook her head, crying harder. I had to know. I didn't want to think that I. She tried to pull away. I have to get out of here. I can't breathe. Shoving open the truck door, Savannah jumped out, stumbling down the shoulder as Johnny killed the engine and left the truck. He slid partially down the grassy slope before finding his footing and catching up to her. Grabbing her arm, he spun her around, caught her with both hands and held her in place as tears streamed from her eyes. It's all my fault, she cried, refusing to look at him. What the hell was I thinking, Johnny? I should have realized. They somehow found out. What are you saying, Savannah? He shook her gently, insisting that she regain composure. Look at me, sweetheart. At last she raised her dark eyes up to his. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have listened to her. I only wanted to help you. To help the resort and put the people back to work. Had I for 1 minute realized she was doing all this for the sake of her career, what the hell are you saying? Johnny demanded, holding her tighter as her body began to shake uncontrollably. Oh God, Johnny. She sank into his arms. I think I killed my sister.